see we have Jim Malachis joining us as well. Jim, would you give us a verbal hello?
Hello.
Excellent. Thank you. And Gil, we have you back. Could we try again? We'll see. Aha, we hear you, Gil. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Ruth Ann. I just joined.
Thank you, Commissioner. Glad to have you. And did we get a
hey, it's Roberta.
Hi, Commissioner, and all of you are coming through well. Are you able to do, yes, I see Commissioner Wisnowskis. Commissioner Rudin, can we also get a video on you?
Do you not? Oh, wait a minute.
Come on, Roberta.
Oh, there it is.
It's
showtime. I know.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
Actress.
They told me to turn off my camera. That shows the difference between you and me. They said for you to turn your camera on and me to turn my camera off.
Yeah, well, you know, no comment.
But that came from Pete Iwanowitz, so I don't know what that's all about. Look at my face.
I err in the side of inclusivity. Both oral and video should be part of these meetings.
We like both here, that's for sure.
Kara, this is Doreen. Are we ready to start, or are we needing to wait a minute?
It looks like one more, Raya. I think you've joined, and if we can get an audio visual on you, I think we can go ahead and get started here. So Raya, would you give us a hello? Verbal hello.
Testing. Can you hear me?
Can hear you, can see you. Excellent.
Fantastic.
Thank you. I think with that, everybody on my participant list is accounted for, and we can go ahead and begin.
Great. Well, thank you, Kara, for your pre-work to make sure everyone's accounted for and all IT issues are resolved. But it's welcome to the 5th meeting of the Climate Action Council. It's great to see all of you again, albeit virtually. I hope everyone has remained well in your world, and an early happy Thanksgiving to all of you, of course. It's my pleasure to kick off today's meeting of the New York State Climate Action Council. We look forward to our discussion today, particularly in light of the exciting updates from our advisory panels that we'll be hearing from, who have been hard at work since our last Climate Action Council meeting. And as has been the case, we are holding today's meeting via webinar, both as a matter of safety and to enable broader participation from across the state. Next slide, please. So that we have another smooth and productive meeting, I will remind the council members of our logistics and procedures for today's meeting. The first is to please remain on mute if you are not speaking, so we can limit any background noise. A member of NYSERDA's IT team will also monitor members to ensure they're muted. We would encourage all council members to join us on video if you are able. You can turn your video on by clicking the camera button on your computer screen. It will be gray if your video is on and red if it is off. Now, to ask questions or provide your thoughts, we will continue our use of the raise your hand using the hand icon on your screen. That will indicate to Basil or me that you would like to speak. To remove or to access the hand raise icon, you will need to click on the panelist participant button, which is marked off in a red box between the button with the 3 dots and the button with the camera on the third visual on this slide. When we call on you, please go ahead and unmute yourself. And when you're done speaking, please place yourself back on mute. We, however, are anticipating a number of roll call votes during today's meeting, and we hope to work through logistics of that process smoothly. In doing so, we will call on members in alphabetical order and ask you to place your vote saying aye or no. And finally, Karen Fusco of NYSERDA is serving as a point of contact for any technical issues you may have. So if you have questions or concerns, please email Karen at karen.fusco@nyserda.ny.gov. She will remain on standby throughout the meeting to help in any way. So let's begin our meeting by calling the roll to see which members of the council are also in attendance today. I'll ask NYSERDA's Valerie Milanovic to call the roll in alphabetical order, with members of the council saying here as your name is called. If you are a designee for the head of a state agency, please state your name and note the commissioner you are representing, please. Val?
Thank you, Doreen, and good afternoon, council members. I'll go quickly through the list, but if we have a mute problem, I'll circle back. I note the presence of Doreen Harris for today's meeting. Co-chair Sagos.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Commissioner Ball.
I am here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Donna DeCarolis.
Here. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Commissioner Dominguez, or a designee. Oh, there she is. I see her. Good afternoon. Gavin Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Elsenbeck.
Here.
CEO Falcone.
Thank you.
President Gertler.
I am here.
Rose Harvey.
I am here.
Howard.
I'm here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Peter Iwanowitz.
I'm here. Thanks.
You're welcome. Chancellor Malatros.
Here.
CEO Quinones. I know we had him earlier. I'll circle back. Commissioner Reardon.
Here.
Ann Reynolds.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Chair Rhodes.
I'm here.
Keisha Santiago Martinez on behalf of Secretary Rosado.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Raya Salter.
I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Shepson.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Commissioner Wisniewskis.
I'm here, thanks.
And Henry Splitzoff. On behalf of Commissioner Zucker or Gary Ginsburg. Take either.
Henry Splitzoff here for Commissioner Zucker, and Gary will be joining us later. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then one more time for Gil Quinones. Gil, can you hear?
I'm here. Just having a
Excellent.
little. I'm even having a little video tech issues, but I'm fixing. Sorry.
That's okay. We've got you. Given that, council co-chairs, I note the presence of a quorum for today's Climate Action Council meeting.
Thank you, Val, and so nice to see everyone today. So, as we kick off today's agenda, it is indeed a full of updates and I think important information that we're excited to share. As you can see, our agenda for today will begin with consideration of the minutes of our last meeting on October 8th. Basil and I will then share a few reflections as council co-chairs. We will then hear about the progress of the Climate Action Council's Agriculture and Forestry, Energy Efficiency and Housing, and Land Use and Local Government advisory panels from the panel chairs. The panel chairs will speak to group discussions to date, including strategies under discussion by the panel. Note that we will be hearing from the other advisory panels during our meeting on December 15th in just a few weeks. Then we will discuss suggested members of our waste advisory panel, as discussed last time, and one addition to the power generation panel. After, we will have a discussion on bioenergy, including biofuel provisions in the CLCPA. And finally, with a little more help from Commissioner Ball, including how the Agriculture and Forestry panel is approaching the topic of bioeconomy and the work the department is funding on this topic. We will then share some agency updates, including DEC's draft value of carbon guidance and the interim definition of disadvantaged communities. Finally, we will wrap up the agenda with some next steps. So, a full agenda for sure, but let's get started. Next slide, please. Let's proceed with consideration of the minutes of the last meeting. The council members did receive the draft minutes with their meeting materials. Are there any discussion items on the minutes themselves? Okay, hearing none, we can move to approve the minutes. Again, I will ask Valerie to call the names of each of the council members. When you hear your name called, please signify that you either approve of the minutes by saying aye, or you disapprove of the minutes by saying no. Val?
Thank you. Co-Chair Harris?
Aye.
Co-Chair Sagos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Ana D. Carolus?
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Aye.
Kevin Donahue?
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck?
Aye.
CEO Falcone?
Aye.
Kevin Hansen?
Well, Eric Gertler's here for ESD. Aye.
Oh, okay.
Still on.
Great. And that's and on the minutes, you're an aye?
Aye. Yes.
Thank you. Rose Harvey? Did we lose Rose?
Aye. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Bob Howard?
Aye.
Iwanowitz?
Aye.
Chancellor Malatros?
No, no kidding. Yeah, aye.
CEO Quinones?
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon?
Aye.
Ann Reynolds?
Aye.
Chair Rhodes?
Aye.
Keisha Santiago Martinez?
Aye.
Raya Salter?
Aye.
Paul Shepson?
Aye.
Commissioner Visnauskas?
Aye.
Henry Splito?
Aye.
With that, the minutes are approved.
Thank you all. Again, the minutes are adopted and will be posted to the Climate Action Council's website. So thank you all. I will now turn the agenda over to Basil to begin our co-chair reflections. Basil?
Great. Doreen, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving week, everybody. I hope you all are safe and well and are going to be able to take some time off this week and reflect on the year and how grateful we are to have each other. So I'll just start. I know we have a lot to cover today. We definitely need to keep a lid on Jim Malatros's microphone there, keep him in check. We have a lot to cover today. It's been an extraordinary year, to say the least, and I think we have a chance to end it on the right foot. But let's move to the next slide, please. I wanted to take a minute to recognize the passing of Cecil Corbin-Mark. I think you all knew, and many of you knew very well, and worked with him. He was taken from us, if you didn't know this, last month at a young age. And it's really an extraordinary blow to the larger environmental community, certainly the environmental justice community. Having worked very closely with him for many years on a range of issues, including this law that generated the Climate Action Council, and while we all are here today, he helped get that passed. He was a fixture on the Climate Justice Working Group. He's been a fixture in Albany. He's been a fixture on every single environmental issue that's come across our plates in Albany now for several decades, and he's been a force of good, really nationwide. And I personally can't imagine the world without him. Just an amazing human being. And you think you know a person, and there was a ceremony that We Act put on the other day, that a number of people spoke from the heart about him, giving their experiences over the years. And it's amazing how much you learn about somebody after they're gone. It's so unfortunate. So if there's anything we can take from this, is just to pledge to get to know each other better, but also carry on his legacy. So I thought we would just take a moment of silence in memory of Cecil, and pledge to carry on his legacy through our work. All right, thank you all. Next slide, please. So we put this slide up as an opportunity to perhaps end the year on a good note. And if you're concerned about the environment and about climate action, I think you can take heart in the results of the last election, what that might mean for us. During the campaign, had a candidate who put forth the most robust climate action agenda of any candidate ever. So that certainly was promising, and he seems to have carried that into the first few weeks of his transition. So I think there are a number of things that we need to look out for as a Climate Action Council over the coming months. Certainly, as the Senate takes shape, we'll see what that means for legislation, how that dovetails with what we're doing here in New York. But I believe it to be true that this is not an opportunity for us to let up on the reins. In fact, I think it's a chance for us to double down and really take advantage of this moment in history to address the climate crisis. Now having a partner in Washington who agrees that this is an issue that must be dealt with at the highest levels. That we're doing all we can as a state and as a collection of states to partner on that front. So we'll see that international leadership. I think that we haven't seen. Perhaps see a budgetary commitment. Talk of a $2 trillion investment in climate over 4 years. The targets are very closely aligned with the targets that New York has set and that we're already working on right now. Including the environmental justice platforms, which are very important, and perhaps a rollback of some of these regulations, reversal of the rollback of the regulations that has been happening the last few years. So more to come on this, I think. We'll get some intel, certainly, and certainly all of you can share that intel with us. But this is a chance for us, I think, to really hit the ground running and finally, spend less of our time fighting Washington, more of our time working with it. Next slide, please. We marked the 8-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, which is remarkable. It's been 8 years. Back in October 27th, I believe it was. So I just wanted to flag for you here when Superstorm Sandy hit. Governor very quickly convened the 2100 Commission within a matter of weeks, which began looking at some of these long-term systemic problems that we had to address in the state to become more resilient. Some of that has been playing out over the years, but we made some announcements recently that fit right into that. First and foremost, some of the work that's happening in the Rockaways. If you remember, the Rockaways is very badly hit during Sandy, lost thousands of structures and some lives. So that project is finally going forward. It's a big project with the Army Corps of Engineers, multi-$100-million project. We're also in the middle of the planning and execution of the Bay Park wastewater plant. Why climate, why wastewater? Well, it's all connected. Bay Park plant, if you remember, one of the biggest plants on the East Coast, was flooded during Sandy. That was since reinforced. We wanted to take a chance to take this opportunity to redirect the outflow from the wastewater plant, keep it out of the western bays, redirect it out into the ocean at a higher treatment level, and give the western bays a chance to recover. And that then provides the climate resiliency for the nearby communities. So that work is underway right now. It's a monumental project that the governor's gotten behind, and we're working very closely with the county on that, Nassau County. We took what we learned out in Sandy and brought it to Lake Ontario during the two out of 3 years of intense flooding up there. We did $300 million in projects, which are underway right now to use the kind of natural infrastructure and combined with some of the traditional infrastructure to create that resilient shoreline that's been missing for many years. Of course, putting out many grants on resiliency and flood protections around the state, largely through the EPF, and then putting out guidance as we did this year, guidance under the Community Risk and Resiliency Act on flood risk. So it's been a busy couple of months for sure at DEC, and it's been a busy a couple of months at our energy agencies. And I'll turn it over to Doreen for that rundown.
Basil, next slide, please. It was in this time frame that we had a major action out of the Public Service Commission. Chair Rhodes, I will certainly ask for your input, but in my view, the order that was issued to expand the clean energy standard was landmark in all respects. It allows us to strongly implement policies and programs in fulfillment of an expanded clean energy standard consistent with the CLCPA. So now we have a 70% by 2030 clean energy standard. And we also have, through commission orders, a pathway to achieve our 9 gigawatt by 2035 offshore wind goal. The order from this fall also does establish a new tier focused on renewables that deliver into the downstate region. And in sum, this sets us up for a rapid transition to a clean energy economy in the state. John, would you like to add anything with respect to this milestone?
I would not. I think it's a great milestone and you nailed it. Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you. We're excited to get to work. The next slide, please. I will also note, and Gil, also, if you'd like to jump in, there was a major, just really an important milestone with respect to NYPA's collaboration with the Peak Coalition in this time frame, which is a group of 5 leading environmental justice and clean energy interests, which announced together an agreement to assess how NYPA can transition its 6 natural gas-fired peaker plants to battery storage and other innovative and renewable technologies, starting with a memorandum of understanding. So this is important because it is the first time a utility has agreed to enter into such a collaboration in the country, and we believe represents an incredibly important accomplishment for New York at large. But I would ask Gil if you'd like to say a word or two about this milestone.
Thank you, Doreen. I just want to thank the Peak Coalition for their partnership and collaboration to help us explore how to transition our natural gas peaker plants to low and zero carbon resources and technologies while meeting the reliability and resiliency requirements in New York City and Long Island. We look forward to working with them side by side over the next year or two and beyond to map out a transition plan for these natural gas power plants to low and zero carbon resources. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Gil, and congratulations on that milestone. Next slide, please. In the category of other recent announcements, I do want to flag the fact that we had several other exciting announcements since our last convening. Been very busy on the virtual circuits with some major news. First, on the left, you can see that the governor announced that $11 million of the Volkswagen settlement funds would go to expanding EV fast charging stations in the state. So that was an important item to flag. Next, 76 West, Governor Cuomo also announced a $2.5 million award in support of 4 winners of the 76 West Clean Energy Business Competition to advance innovation to lower carbon emissions and spur economic growth in the state. We see innovation as an area that we as a council should and will be looking at in more detail in the future. 76 West is a great example of those commitments in action for sure. And then finally, with respect to climate progress, the governor announced the $10 million New York Climate Progress Program, which will provide capital investments to support startups that create low carbon goods and services. So this is a program open to early stage startup firms focusing on this climate technology, and really will stimulate local economies and climate technologies most explicitly as part of our green economy as well. So lots of good news over the past month for sure. And with these updates, we're geared up for our discussion as to our progress on our 3 advisory panels that are reporting out today. So I'll hand it back to Basil to kick off this portion of our discussion. Basil?
Great. Thank you. And you all get me as a timekeeper again this time. I drew the straws on that. So we're gonna have 20-minute segments here, and I will have to enforce it. As much good stuff as you want to pass along, we have to get through a very robust agenda here. So next slide, please. And you see that the panels that we will hear from today: land use and local government, Sarah Crowell, energy efficiency and housing, Ruth Ann Wisnauskas, Commissioner, and Ag and Forestry, Richard Ball, Commissioner. So we'll do the 20 minutes of each. I'll be keeping track of time. We'll of course have opportunities for Q&A, but let's get going right now with Sarah. Sarah?
Hi, am I unmuted? Okay, good. Hi, thank you for having me to report out on the progress that we have made over the past few months. Since August, our panel has held 4 full public meetings and a number of working subgroup meetings focusing on specific topics within our scope. As you know, our panel's charged to identify the actions that should be taken in the areas of land use and local government, require a great deal of collaboration and cooperation with other panels as we consider what has to happen at the local level to reach the goals of all of the sectors being considered in this project. So to that end, we've really started also during this period to engage in cross-panel collaboration, including discussions with ag and forestry, energy efficiency and housing and transportation, and we will have others obviously as time goes on. Regarding issues relevant to our respective focus areas. We're also looking forward to meeting with the Climate Justice Working Group next week to talk about issues related to environmental justice. And finally, we've also started to engage and consult with local officials and have invited a group of approximately 20 public officials representing a range of municipal sizes and types, as well as geographic range, to participate in a roundtable discussion with the panel on December 3rd, next week. So the strategies I'm going to go over today should provide a picture of our panel's current thinking, but I want to offer a caveat that these are preliminary draft ideas. We've done more than just scratch the surface, a lot more, but we still have a lot more work ahead of us also. And much more collaboration with other panels, with local officials, with other experts in the field to refine, revise, and vet these strategies, maybe replace them with others, continue to develop specific recommendations to submit to the council for consideration for inclusion in the scoping plan. In other words, as a panel, we are not going to have much downtime before March. We've got a lot ahead of us. But for now, we've preliminarily grouped our strategies into 3 buckets, reflecting the 3 subgroups we formed within our panel. Land use, those are land use, clean energy, and adaptation and resilience. The 5 land use strategies, 3 clean energy strategies, and 2 adaptation and resilience strategies represents our thinking to date in each of these categories and where the panel will be focusing in the coming months. So can I have the first slide, please? Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is the first land use strategy is to promote and facilitate county and intermunicipal smart growth planning efforts, including focusing development in priority growth areas. This strategy recognizes the importance of managing development patterns to minimize dependence on single occupancy vehicles, reduce trip length, and thus reduce VMTs. Our panel's exploring some of the coordinated county level growth area plans that already exist in the state, including in Genesee, Orange, and Tompkins County, for example, as potential models to promote coordinated focused development. This approach could serve to direct mixed-use development to existing population centers. It could encourage infill and redevelopment of brownfields and other vacant and abandoned industrial sites that make use of existing infrastructure. and with a goal really of creating compact mixed-use, mixed-income development, walkable, bikeable, and transit-oriented streets, and a diversity of housing choices. As a complement, communities will be also better positioned to preserve and protect natural and working lands by directing development, wetlands, and open space that provides opportunities for carbon sequestration, food production, stormwater management, and protection of critical habitat. So some of the issues our panel will have to consider as we further explore this strategy include feasibility of county and regional growth center plans, ensuring that any policies that we ultimately suggest would support investment in disadvantaged communities while avoiding displacement and, of course, avoiding so-called climate gentrification. Can I have the next slide, please? Our second land use strategy is to build capacity at the regional level and provide support to municipalities to promote smart growth, facilitate clean energy siting, and reduce VMTs. This strategy really recognizes that to meet the CLCPA goals in the land use transportation sector, we'll need to ramp up the number of local comprehensive plans, zoning codes, and other land use ordinances that incorporate smart growth and sustainability. To get there, we may need some sort of county or regional mechanism to deliver technical assistance and capacity building at the local level in order to put in place planning and zoning that promotes smart growth and considers clean energy siting. As we continue to develop this strategy, our panel will explore existing programs and services and consider various scales and methods and models for delivering assistance to support municipalities. In particular, we will, of course, consider the disproportionate needs of environmental justice communities where capacity tends to be limited and how best to meet those needs. Can I have the next slide, please? Finally, our third land use strategy aims to promote, I said finally, but it's only our third, to promote coordinated regional approaches to meet climate goals while integrating transportation, housing, and land conservation needs. With the ambitious goals in front of us, our panel recognized that current planning approaches may not be sufficient to move the needle fast enough. So our panel is exploring options for accelerating adoption of policies and programs that may move communities more quickly toward energy efficient development patterns, such as a regional system of coordinating land use, housing, transportation, and conservation goals. We're looking toward other states to explore potential approaches, such as California's SB 375, which sets regional greenhouse gas reduction targets and rewards and incentivizes local action that helps achieve those goals. While California does have a different system of regional governance for transportation, housing, and land use, it could offer insights into a similarly broad and bold system of regional planning and governance for us in the state. Some of the challenges and issues that we'll continue to explore as we consider the strategy revolve around home rule and local government capacity. We'll also continue to consider the potential effectiveness of incentive programs as compared to mandates and the viability of developing or expanding regional support structures. May I have the next slide, please? Our panel is considering this fourth strategy, streamlining and incentivizing smart growth project review to overcome challenges to developing projects that meet smart growth goals. Our panels asked the question, is there a way to streamline or expedite the review process for projects that meet threshold criteria for smart growth, equity, protections against gentrification, and sustainability and climate criteria? In other words, the kinds of development that we want without quelling community engagement and input. So a couple of recommendations have been discussed, such as encouraging or requiring more advanced public outreach and education, looking at providing state-supported GEISs to jumpstart a process or even seeker reforms. This is still very early in the process, though, and as we continue to explore the strategy, we will carefully balance streamlining to encourage desirable development with opportunities for community input and engagement, and especially in EJ communities where the voices have not been historically heard. We want to be very careful there. How am I doing on time? I'm about halfway through. I don't.
You have 12 minutes and 9 seconds left. I'll give you 2 seconds there.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. I'll take it. Our final land use strategy. Oh, can I have the next slide, please? No. So our final land use strategy is to coordinate state planning funds, activities, and entities to ensure that transportation, housing, and conservation actions are not in conflict and to achieve VMT, clean energy, and equity goals. A number of agencies support planning and zoning related smart growth, clean energy, housing, and transportation, but some local officials have told us that they find it difficult to navigate all of these programs and to bundle the multitude of programs effectively together due to different criteria, different timelines, different agencies, et cetera. So we're considering the coordinated effort across agencies in order to help maximize outcomes and make things easier on communities. So our panel will continue to work closely with local officials and state agency representatives to analyze and discuss different funding and eligibility requirements across planning programs, activities, and entities to identify points of conflict and repetition and to find opportunities for better alignment to more efficiently deliver resources to our municipalities. And we'll also explore options for improving communication and assistance tools for communities on appropriate funding streams. And that's it for land use. Could I have the next slide, please? So this brings us to the first of our 3 clean energy strategies. The 3 preliminary clean energy strategies that I'll go over next are focused on the role of local government in adoption of clean energy and energy efficient measures. The clean energy subgroup is considering both how local government can reduce its own carbon footprint and what policies and practices should be considered to ensure that local government can support broader clean energy and energy efficiency adoption. So this first strategy proposes establishing statewide higher energy codes, benchmarking, building performance mandates, and PACE financing, among other things, to avoid a patchwork of policies. This is one of which we will have to work closely with energy efficiency and other panels. But in our conversations with local government representatives, we're finding that there's concern about taking on initiatives that may place them at what they perceive to be a competitive disadvantage to other communities in their region. In addition, the inconsistency between municipalities can make development more confusing or difficult and could even serve as a disincentive for developers to explore opportunities in New York State. By putting clear statewide requirements in place, the patchwork of different rules and opportunities in different communities can be avoided, and we can ensure that all New Yorkers have access to the benefits of clean energy policies. But as we explore this, it's really important that we keep in mind the potential for added cost and administrative burden that may fall on resource-constrained municipalities and identify ways in which those burdens can be reduced, especially in environmental justice communities in areas where resources are really constrained. Next slide, please. So the second clean energy strategy we're exploring is to encourage local governments to take a leadership role in pursuing clean energy adoption through community choice aggregation programs and launching community campaigns to increase local access to clean energy products and services. Local initiatives like CCA and community campaigns to promote clean energy can really make significant contributions to CLCPA goals and can help spur widespread deployment of distributed energy resources. But we're finding that local governments need a clear path forward to implement actions that have the greatest potential for impact, and that increased access can be achieved with state programs that provide grants, technical assistance, and recognition for local leadership. As our panel explores existing programs, we'll be looking for points of conflict and opportunities for better alignment so that grants and technical assistance can be delivered efficiently and effectively to best meet the needs of every New York State locality. May I have the next slide, please? Our third and final clean energy strategy focuses on local government facilities and operations, and will examine ways to overcome legal, financial, regulatory, and technical barriers to greening municipal buildings, facilities, and fleets. So in addition to regulating energy users within their boundaries, local governments control significant energy consuming assets like streetlight systems, wastewater treatment plants, public transit systems, et cetera. And they're well positioned to advance district systems and microgrids as well. Implementing strategies to increase efficiency of local government facilities will not only reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions, it can also help lower operating costs and generate financial benefits over time, resulting in improved fiscal situations for our localities. But on the other hand, taking the necessary actions in the first instance can strain local resources and may even be beyond local capacity entirely. So our panel will explore opportunities to better align existing programs, as well as identify gaps and unmet needs that are limiting local government climate action. May I have the next slide, please? And finally, that brings us to our third bucket, adaptation and resilience. As we all know, under the best case scenario, climate change is still expected to bring increased temperatures, sea level rise, and frequent extreme weather conditions. So the following two broad strategies represent our panel's initial thoughts related to adaptation and resilience to climate change that's required, that we really need to be thinking about in addition to mitigation. These are a starting point, and really sort of the beginning. We'll be working on these and further developing these and expanding them as we work with other panel representatives to develop a multi-panel approach and strategy to adaptation and resilience. So this first strategy emphasizes the need to develop policies, programs, and resources that are intentionally directly focused on reducing risks associated with acute climate hazards. While we can't avoid the effects of climate change, the state can take numerous steps in the near term to support regional and local adaptation and to reduce risks associated with sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather, and all of the other impacts of climate change. So our panels recognize that many of the regions and municipalities, however, lack technical staff and financial resources necessary to implement effective adaptation and resilience programs and projects. So we'll explore how the state can provide the needed support at the local level. And to this end, the panelists have pointed to the valuable role of climate coordinators and planners provided by state programs. This is actually a theme throughout that you may have noticed, sort of a thread throughout the land use and local government strategies. Write that out.
Sarah, just a 5-minute warning.
Okay. Oh, good. I have one last one. I'm good. Next
Give
slide,
time
please.
for questions. Yep.
Oh,
Great.
fast. Okay. This is our last. Our last slide is to seek to ensure state and local investments and assess climate change and resiliency impacts of projects. You know what? Why don't I let you all read this, and so there's time for questions. Would that be better? Does anyone have any questions? I don't want to not have that opportunity.
Yeah, I would. Basil, are you able to see the hands that have been raised, or do you want me to jump in? If you click,
I see them. I didn't see what order they came in on, so we just go from top to bottom with Ann Reynolds first.
Sure. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for all that, Sarah. It's a lot of great stuff. I had a question about something that wasn't listed. I'm curious if the group talked about it and decided not to pursue it, or if it didn't come up. And that's municipalities and local governments hosting renewable energy, whether it's rooftop solar, commercial solar, community solar, or larger grid scale solar or grid scale wind. One of the absolute key parts of the puzzle here of moving towards the climate goals is having places in New York welcome and host renewable energy projects of various sizes. And the second bucket there, the second strategy, even CCA and solarized campaigns are also great, but they're buying renewable energy from somewhere else usually. So I was wondering if that came up.
Yes, it has, and it's sort of it is sort of buried in some of the land use strategies that I think will get broken out eventually. But yeah, the panel has discussed the need to think about how to site, how to zone for, how to appropriately zone for solar, and not just standalone, but also on buildings and attached to, both behind and in front of the grid, I guess in front of the meter. It has come up, and it will continue to be something that we'll explore further.
Thank you.
Okay, Gavin.
Just real quick, like Ann, I appreciate all the information. Just a lot going on with the ORES office and citing and the draft regulations, and we're in the draft public hearing period. what coordination is occurring between the working group at this point and where the Department of State is moving? Because what we need to do is expedite the siting of these renewable projects at a local level. I didn't hear a lot of that today, and I was wondering if you could expand on that at all.
Well, I think, I mean, ORES is the ORES regs are sort of on there, they're in the hearing process, so they're on their own timeline. And it's not something that our panel is directly participating in at this point. Although I think they're both, that there will ultimately obviously be a local government role in the, and I think local governments are participating in that process, but our panel is not commenting on the regulations.
Thank you for that. I just would ask you to reconsider, that as a priority, because if we don't cite these renewable projects, we're not going to move forward on making any progress on these goals. So I just ask you guys to reconsider that.
Well, I think the panel is, I do think the panel is certainly considering the concept of citing solar, but just not specifically commenting on the ORES regs, as those are sort of in their process right now. But glad to talk to you about it further if you would like.
Okay, Gavin, if you're done, I'll move to Bob Howarth.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah. It was a great summary. Your panel is clearly doing a lot. I've got two questions. Quickly, just a general one for all of the panels. Are the panel meetings being recorded? Often the panels are meeting at the same time, and it'd be great if they were. But specifically for your panel, I like one of your foci. I like all of your foci, but I like the one on helping local governments with their own energy needs and greenhouse gas emissions. I'm wondering if you're including school districts in that. At least in our area, the school districts are, we're a rural community. They're major consumers of energy, major emitters because of their buses and heating and cooling, and they're not really tightly tied to other aspects of local government. And of course, they're financially constrained like hell. So I know the superintendent and principals in our area would love to do more in energy, but they just can't. And so any way the state could help facilitate that, I think would be wonderful, both as an example of what can be done, but also a way to significantly reduce emissions. Thank you.
That's a good flag. We have not specifically talked about school districts, but I think we can easily bring that into the conversation. I think that's a really good point, and something we'll bring back to the panel. I don't know for sure if all the panel meetings are being recorded. We generally haven't been recording ours, but we do have notes available that we can can share.
I've seen the notes, but
yeah. Sorry. In general, what we have endeavored to do is to post the slides and the meeting notes. You're correct, Sarah. We're not, as a matter of standard practice, recording the meetings themselves.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Bob. Raya?
Yes, this is a comment that also goes, I think, across panels, but just want to make sure that particularly where any state funding is at issue, and it's great that these equity considerations are being looked at specifically, and they look like they're great considerations. So it'll be important that state and local governments understand that there is a current and evolving framework around the levels of investment, 40% of goals for disadvantaged communities. There'll be a disproportionate harm analysis that the state is going to have to look at that should be incentivized for local governments to also take a look at, so that there is this overarching framework that is going to be at issue and for compliance, and that state and local governments are going to need to have the tools to do this identification that you've already mentioned and identify and meet the needs of the communities, but also comply with the state standards.
We do, and I think there's a lot more work to be done there. I think that's one of the topics that we'll begin to explore with the Climate Justice Working Group next week. So we're looking forward to doing that, and certainly acknowledge and I'm aware that this is an important thing to continue to focus on.
Okay, thanks, Raya. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Really impressive work. Just want to echo things that Bob Howarth was saying. Great stuff. Really like the foci of a lot of areas. Well, I think you mentioned earlier, maybe I got the dates wrong, but you have an upcoming roundtable with, I think you said, a couple of dozen of local officials.
Yes.
What's the date and time of that? I don't see any notice of it. I'd love to participate, even if it's just auditing and listening into it.
You
And then-
absolutely can. It will be open to the public. It's December 3rd at 1 o'clock, and we will get that posted. But it's
Okay.
December 3rd at 1. About 20 local officials. We have been sort of having initial conversations with them. So some of their initial feedback is already folded into some of these recommendations, but it's a great group.
I'm curious where the folks came from in terms of, what recommendations were received, or like people that you would reach out to, like how were they contacted? I'm just curious about the sort of the geographic diversity of the panel that's been pulled together, gender diversity, racial, ethnic diversity of the actual representatives from those local officials.
It is, it's got broad geographic diversity. All regions of the state are represented, all of the 10 REDC regions. And there was certainly an intent to keep it as diverse as possible in every way. And there are also in terms of municipalities, there are counties, towns, villages, cities. So we tried to make it as diverse in every way as possible.
Great. Yeah, if we could have a list of those members that are coming to that roundtable in advance, I'd love to see that before the meeting. I'll do my best to get there in the 3rd.
Sure.
Thanks.
Glad to share that.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Sarah, thank you. Great presentation. We'll move now to Ruth Ann to talk about energy efficiency and housing. Ruth Ann, take it away. Your 20 minutes starts now. I'll give you a 5-minute warning.
Thanks, Basil. Good afternoon, everybody. I am privileged and delighted to be the chair of the Energy Efficiency and Housing panel. I have Janet Joseph from NYSERDA, who is my co-chair and has been a great partner in this effort. Our panel is incredibly engaged and incredibly busy. We've had 5 public panel meetings. We've split into 3 subpanels focused on single family, multifamily, and commercial institutional, and they all meet weekly. We have much to discuss. We have had 3 expert roundtables, bringing in folks to give us really incredible and important input, and we have had over 50 stakeholders at those meetings, and they have been really productive and great. We also, don't operate in isolation, of course, so we have been had cross collaboration with other panels, and we'll continue to do that, including the land use for Sarah and her team, as well as power generation, as well as the Just Transition Working Group and the Climate Justice Group. We are obviously buildings and housing and communities are integral in all these other ways. So we are very focused on the cross collaboration that we will be doing as part of this. I'm going to talk about 5 things. They are not sort of exhaustive of the things that our panel has talked about, and they're not necessarily prioritized. They just are meant to be sort of a compilation of some of the deliberations that our panel has had. And we continue, obviously, to refine a lot of these ideas. So I'm going to go through mandates, through financing and incentives, training and education, technology and R&D, and resiliency. And those are kind of our 5 buckets that I will talk through. I'm not going to read all the way through my slides because that would be boring. So I will just try to get to the main points. So can we go to the next slide? Great. So our first scope sort of strategies are mandates that require energy efficiency improvements and on-site emission reductions in buildings, as well as appliances, with dates as a market signal for that. So as many people know, the building stock in New York State is old. There are about 4.5 million building structures in the state. About 4 million of those are residential structures. Obviously, most commonly for homeownership, those are single family structures, and for rental, those are primarily in multifamily buildings. I think I had said this maybe way back when, but just as a reminder, over 90% of the housing stock in New York State is over 40 years old. And more than 30% of it is more than 80 years old. So it is a very hard set of buildings to be working with. In some ways, obviously, it presents a lot of opportunities, but it is also an old stock to be working with. So as we think about changing practices at scale with statutory and regulatory tools, we think about state energy code, the building code, and the timing signals that can be embedded in those to really signal both to the market as well as to the people who are living inside all and using those buildings about this as a goal. So we have been focusing on energy codes, building codes, appliance standards, as well as building performance standards, obviously to look at existing buildings and some on-site emission changes. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges, and when we talk about code changes around making sure that they are feasible technically for the buildings, making sure that manufacturers and installers have lead time to be able to get to these goals. And obviously, there's an enormous amount of cost, and that cost cannot be borne solely by the public or the private sector. And so as we talk a little bit about all of these things, sort of the financing and the cost of these is both important writ large and also important through the lens of EJ and LMI and disadvantaged communities, and making sure that those communities neither bear the brunt of any of these costs in any disproportionate way, and also making sure they aren't left behind as other places switch to clean technologies and they do not. So I won't sort of repeat the disadvantaged community thread in all of these, but it is very, very central to all the work that we are doing when we think about housing and we think about communities, not just because of the 40% requirement, but because it is sort of in the ethos, I think, in the housing world to make sure that our neighborhoods and our communities are not left behind. Can I go to the next slide? So financing and incentives. So decarbonizing single family, multifamily, commercial buildings, institutional buildings at large scale requires both behavioral change, but as well as money. And that can be capital investments, that can be fees, there can be innovations. There's sort of a lot of ways to get that. The three sort of strategies that we are most often sort of talking about are inducing change through taxes, fees, levies that help incentivize owners and developers, as well as residents, to be reducing their emissions. The second piece is around lenders. There's a lot of capital in the housing and the building market. It's there. It just needs to be focused on making sure that it recognizes that as we make energy efficiency investments into single family and multifamily and commercial buildings, that there are underwriting standards that reflect that create savings, which in turn create incentive for owners and developers, as well as homeowners and residents. And lastly, we want to make sure on the owners and users of buildings that there is sort of this kind of more downstream impact, so that people can see that there are cash incentives or low interest financing, or ways that people can really see that those financial incentives are available kind of across the spectrum. Again, making sure that these financing and incentives are targeted to and benefiting of LMI communities is a constant theme in the discussions that we're talking about. And I think also a real reflection that there needs to be, and hopefully will be per Basil's comments at the top of the meeting, some federal resources that can come into play in this set of strategies, because the need is great. As I said, there are 4.5 million buildings in the state of New York. So getting at these strategies over a period of time requires capital, and that capital, we understand, can't just be New York State public and private sector, but we would hope to leverage federal resources as well. So moving on to our third strategy around training and education. So sort of three buckets here, right? In order to really induce kind of the upstream and the downstream behavioral changes and increasing people's awareness, we want to make sure that people over time, accept the change and support the need that we have to switch to electrification and the reduction in greenhouse gases. So we think of this as a workforce development. So making sure there are skilled professionals to design buildings, build buildings, operate buildings is important. Also an educational piece around the owners and the developers and the design professionals to make sure that this sort of reduction has to, and this goal towards all electric buildings or making buildings electrification ready really has to be taught to owners and operators and designers to make sure that they're incorporating it early on. You know, there's going to be multiple steps to getting buildings to be electrification ready, and there's a lot of education to go into getting that to happen. And the third one, again, is sort of down to the sort of the downstream, educating the users and the residents and the businesses, and making sure that people see that the impact of their decisions and the impact of the way that they live and the way that they use energy has both an economic impact for them, has an environmental quality impact for them, and that they really understand sort of at their decision points how a carbon-free set of buildings really impacts them at the individual level. So, you know, these are really kind of a widespread series of training education from all the way sort of from the workforce, the actual people who are building buildings and those that use them and live with them. For us, our panel has spent an enormous amount of time talking about the importance of behavioral change and how do we get at that. And so this is really meant, the strategy is really meant to embody a lot of those thoughts. And we'll go to our next slide. I think I'm going to win on the fastest person to do their slides. Our next one is our bucket is really around technology and R&D. We have obviously a lot of technology for all electric buildings. We have heat pumps, we have geothermal. Those things need to keep getting improved. The performance has to get better, the cost has to get better. And so we want to make sure there's a real focus on having those technologies continue to improve. Second to that, from a strategy, is making sure that there are a lot of buildings for whom this is going to be very hard, those that are on district steam, hydronic distribution, and we need to make sure that we can do some pilot sort of demonstration type projects and keep that R&D going to make sure that we can have solutions for those hard to convert buildings. Those are the buildings for whom the economics may be the hardest. And so we need to kind of de-risk that change for those buildings. And part of that sort of de-risking it is demonstrating for people that the technology is there, the technology works, and the technology will result in savings for them as we switch to an overall electric building stock. And so making sure we're doing both R&D, but also these kind of demonstration projects to prove the market to people, we feel is super important. The fourth bullet there under the strategies, which is around reducing embodied carbon, is another great one that comes up in our discussions, which is really around making sure that the materials, the transportation, all the stuff that goes into building the building is also part of our focus. And it isn't just the actual building itself, it's everything that goes into it. So more technological advances for cost-effective solutions for building materials is also really sort of a critical part of the things that we are talking about. Last thing I think on this one around technology is also the building grid and really making sure there's an advancement in as we look at whether the grid itself is dynamic and whether the power companies can speak to each other, we can manage loads and be able to be responsive to that, I think is another sort of technology innovation that people are really focused on, maybe also on looking at microgrids and how those play into low-income communities as well. And next slide, our last one, as is mandated, while we're all working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we also need to adapt to the intensifying impacts of climate change and vice versa. And so we want to make sure that as we are making things more resilient, we are making them all electric. And as we are making them all electric, we are making them more resilient in all the places where that needs to happen. And so we think about supporting and coordinating these improved resiliency solutions for all electric buildings, making sure the grid and the transmission has resilience and independence. Again, sort of another nod to microgrids there. electrification paired with supplemental heating sources. So obviously making sure that if we are in high climate risk areas and we are doing electrification, that as other climate events happen, that there are backup sources for those communities so they don't end up displaced. And that's sort of an important thing. And in general, just making sure that we are improving the building stock to withstand all the impacts of climate change. This has been, especially sort of interesting focus for us as we hit the anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, and I'm sort of reminded of how many people were without power in those incredibly impacted areas, and how, as we think, and we do now, and as we think about the resiliency as moving equipment to the roof, and we hadn't necessarily been doing that with the lens of decarbonizing buildings as well. And now I think that's come much more into focus in recent years. And I think this is meant to really take that and build on it in an even bigger way across the whole state. So those are sort of our 5 buckets. There are so many more things that our panel has discussed, and this is sort of an attempt to kind of distill into our big kind of 5 topics. And I'm sure if our panel was speaking, they would say we could probably do this for an hour, given all the topics we've talked about. But hopefully that just sort of gives a little bit of a summary of kind of where we are as we think about our recommendations over the next couple months.
Great. Good job, Ruthann. So we have a few questions here. I think Peter came in first. Peter?
Sorry, that's a legacy from the old one. I didn't take my hand down.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Anne?
Hi there.
Hey.
So thanks so much for all that information. It was a lot of stuff presented in a short amount of time. I have what I think is a vague but important question. Because as I'm thinking through what's going to happen when these different panels come to the council for approval or ideas, with everything you just went through, it strikes me as New York State is already doing all of that. NYSERDA, utilities, and even NYPA through the various executive orders for state agencies is doing that already. But it's also the one thing that has to be kicked up in terms of scale, and it's going to be hard for the council to differentiate between everything the state's already doing or a new proposal or a new recommendation that's either a different idea or scaled up version of everything you just said. And I was wondering if your panel has grappled with that yet, in terms of what the recommendations will look like beyond everything the state's already doing with energy efficiency.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and Janet, you can jump in where I miss. I think that we did spend a fair amount of time understanding sort of the lay of the land, both right, what is the housing stock, where is it, what does it look like, making sure we hit all the pieces, and then looking at programmatically, what are we doing now, what are NYSERDA's programs, what are other agency programs to get at that, and then trying to sort of get at both kind of a gap analysis, but then to your point, also kind of like a scale analysis. And so I don't think we've gotten there yet to our final, but I think that is very much in the way we are thinking about this. And I would imagine that getting, as we present further, we can certainly sort of touch on that distinguishing point between what we're already doing and what is either a scale up version of that versus what are sort of new, discrete incremental changes from what we're doing now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Good. Thanks, Ann. Dennis.
Thanks, Basil. I want to build a little bit off of Ann's question, because and maybe this is a timing piece that I'd like to, maybe Doreen or Basil, but some of the concern that I'm starting to have is we're already putting out programs, and then every time we put out a program, we mention, and there's a carve out for disadvantaged communities, and I'm really starting to get confused by some of this. Because, you know, I get the 40% of the spend is to benefit these disadvantaged communities, and they're going to be defined by the Climate Justice Working Group. But I'm also relying on someone or the Climate Justice Group to have the communities define benefits, so that we're designing programs to what the community has defined as the benefit. Not so much, you know, what we're already putting out there. You know, June 23rd, we announced 10.6 million in funding for PV and storage. August, the $1 billion in energy efficiency, the Make Ready program, and then recently the direct current fast charging, just as examples. And we always put in there, oh no, by the way, 25% of this has to be within a half mile of disadvantaged communities. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just not sure that we are in a position to rank the priorities for these programs until Sarah, Ruth Ann get through this type of analysis along with the Climate Justice Working Group. Because I really think we have an opportunity to allow the communities, because they actually know what they want. We simply have to ask them, and then really mobilize our strategies around their needs. And the other thing, maybe Ruth Ann directly, is because Sarah's presentation was extremely good as well. But are we looking at more holistic solutions? You know, because right now we do a lot that is very mutually exclusive and programmatic perspectives. So really thinking about what we're trying to do that marries economic development, jobs, affordable homes, energy efficiency, solar storage, infrastructure. Because you even mentioned the issue of decarbonization and electrification. And if you recall, last meeting, we had a transmission distribution planning group. We had that report that says phase one, phase two of projects. Phase one will cost us $6.8 billion through the utilities. And then phase two, $10.4 billion. My experience with the utility industry, that's going to pale in comparison to decarbonizing at the distribution level. So I'm just trying to think about what the timing is, all of this. One, designing and carve outs for quote unquote disadvantaged communities without the benefit of their definition. And then are we taking a more holistic approach to how we're going to be responding or having these conversations? Because the upgrade of the distribution system can actually, if we think about that as non-wires alternatives, can help pay for a lot of this. And I'm just curious to see if that's been considered. Sorry for that drawn out message.
It's a lot to unpack there, Dennis. I maybe I'll take a couple pieces and then maybe kick it to others. I think I would say on the housing piece, in terms of like being holistic, we see the cross-panel collaboration is really essential to this, and I don't just say that as just to say it, that it is important that the power gen panel and the land use panel and just transition and climate, that we really are all part of the same ecosystem. So I don't see us as working in silos on this. I see us all sort of working in depth in our areas. And then also we've been coming together and talking about, we have spent in our panel, for example, a lot of time talking about workforce development, which is a really, big focus for the Just Transition group, but really important for the folks in my panel too. So there's sort of no daylight, I think, on a lot of the issues between us. I think maybe to one of your earlier points about we're sort of doing stuff now, I guess I would argue that I think much of the work that we're doing sort of feeds into these overall goals. It's probably been being done incrementally, and this is really an opportunity for us to take that work and the goals, right, and we're moving the bar way up. And so I don't see any of that sort of interim work as not sort of in line with the overall goals. And I think we all sort of work closely with the communities that we're working in, certainly for our part on housing, and NYSERDA's part too. We work a lot in disadvantaged communities. So I think we'll continue to work with them to get their input, as we always do on the work that we do, and don't think that's probably inconsistent there either. But I think there's probably a couple other points you had in there that maybe others might want to address.
maybe to build on that, in terms of the work that we're doing now around disadvantaged communities, just to underscore, we continue to engage with our stakeholders in this area, and we do have a sense of urgency. So we are trying to get the feedback on the ground, ensure that whatever it is we're rolling out now addresses the needs of disadvantaged communities. But we are very mindful that the Climate Justice Working Group has just commenced its work, and we are prepared to adjust and evolve based on the input of the Climate Justice Working Group. But I don't think there's any sense on the state team. We can't pause for sure. We have to try to continue to make progress. So that's the way we're approaching our work. We're continuing, as Ruth Ann said, to engage with the communities, to listen to the communities, to try to deliver benefits and value to low and moderate income communities, disadvantaged communities, and very mindful that the Climate Justice Working Group has recently commenced its work, and we will refine and adjust accordingly.
Great. Janet, thank you. And maybe I'll just add a little bit to that. So we have the CLCPA, which sets the targets, and then we have all of the programmatic operations underway amongst the various state agencies. There are various policy reasons for us to move ahead with all the things that you mentioned and other things that get to our renewables commitments that have been in place for some time, that get to our disadvantaged communities, environmental justice commitments. So I would view the investments and the progress that we're making on merging those two things on the one track, disadvantaged and investments, as so-called no regrets investments. At this point, we are making those because they satisfy a number of existing objectives, and then we merge that then with the work that you all are doing, the panels are doing, and ultimately to hit our targets, we have to know what the delta is at the end of the day. So the timing may not match up perfectly, but we do have the benefit at this point of the interim definition of the Climate Justice Working Group that they have been working through. Ultimately, we will get a permanent definition of disadvantage, so that'll help guide us long term. I will note that we have, at the end of this presentation, we will have a quick update on the Climate Justice Working Group that might get to some of the questions that you've raised. But I think it's just incumbent upon all of us, as we are not in silos. We are all fairly well merged in our thinking between the various agencies. So hopefully that can assuage some of the early concerns that may come up on this regard. Thank you, Dennis. Anne, I think your hand is an old one. Raya.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you for also extremely important that we nail down what benefits looks like and have a strong framework. And I know we'll talk about that later. Really important that the Climate Justice Working Group gets all of the information and data it needs to make this decision, including what the state spending looks like right now as you're making these no regrets investments. And for this panel in particular, I feel like it would be excellent if this, one thing that I didn't see here was an emphasis on consumer protection. I think this is something also that could go across all panels, but it would, sure you've thought about it, but would love to see that elevated. And also a commitment to, again, something that can go across all panels, but a commitment to really, especially in this area, MWBEs. So I wanted to say that quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Raya. Thank you. So we're way over on this point. We have a couple more questions. Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi, Basil. Thanks. And can you hear me?
I hear you, Gary.
Yeah, so regarding code changes, and especially for buildings, commercial buildings that have HVAC, I assume that you're cognizant and will make sure that things like ASHRAE recommendations for delivery of fresh air to building occupants will be maintained, or at least be, part of the thought process In this COVID age where there is a lot of emphasis on trying to make sure that, infection control, building qualities and parameters are part of infection control. I just thought that, you're probably thinking about it, but just thought I'd raise it as well.
Thank you, Gary. We are definitely aware of that issue and looking into strategies of maximizing both the public health as well as energy efficiency. Very much appreciate the comment.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Peter, you get the last question.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but so I'll pose it and then maybe a question. But I'm hearing a little bit of conflict here. You had said just a couple minutes ago, Basil, that there was an interim definition coming together on disadvantaged communities, but then Janet had said that the climate justice working group was just starting to come together. So are we going to talk about that at the end of the day today, or can somebody answer that question? Is there an interim definition or not? I guess.
Why don't we take that up at the end? There is some interim guidance on that. We can go through that in the last few slides, if that's okay.
And the guidance comes from the climate justice working group members?
Yes, that's correct. Okay. So we went over, but that's okay. Good conversation, good questions. Next, we will go to, and last, the Ag and Forestry panel. Commissioner Ball.
But can everyone hear me?
We hear you.
All right, great. Thank you. Really appreciate it again, and looking forward to providing you with a status report on our work to date. Can I have the next slide, please? Our Ag and Forestry panel is made up of 18 experts in the field of both agriculture and forestry. It's really a diverse set of expertise, and we include farmers, foresters, academic researchers, professors, policy experts, and even conservation professionals. We have met 5 times so far, and we'll be getting into our draft of our recommendations. A lot of extensive feedback from the panel. And actually, to get to this point, our panel broke into subgroup teams to get a deeper dive on a very diverse set of recommendations from our work plan. You see them here. We set up these work group teams. They've had meetings, they've convened and developed recommendations you'll see shortly. Livestock and dairy management, soil health and nutrient management, agroforestry, land conversions, forestry, and the bioeconomy, which is a kind of exciting one that we'll talk more specifically about at the end of our day's agenda. So they're enhancing markets for obviously sustainably harvest New York grown products that can sequester carbon and the indirect benefits thereby too. The next slides are going to go into more detail about these recommendations, and there are a few common themes throughout much of the recommendations I will highlight, but I'll try not to go into too much detail for each one of them. So with that, next slide, please. All right, livestock and dairy management for methane emission reduction through manure management. Looking at reducing methane emissions, implementing cover and flare systems, anaerobic digesters, and other systems that can abate, collect, capture, and combust methane from the storage of manure. It's important to note manure storages are a very essential best management practice for us to achieve high levels of nutrient management, largely driven by water quality concerns, but also nutrient concerns. This is a very important strategy to address, as it's a major source of methane from livestock farms and driven mainly by efforts, again, for water quality. With regards to equity, and good conversation so far on that, but our considerations here for most all our recommendations are pretty broadly written at this point and very consistent. There are a few highlights I'll point out, but we'll be working again, as you all are, with refining these, and looking forward to the feedback from the Environmental Justice and Just Transitions Working Group. So we're going to make these, to that point, programs and activities available to as many farmers as possible, A lot of the projects we're looking at here are pretty expensive, and although farms can see a return on investment, many cases there's upfront costs that may be challenging, especially as we've seen milk prices continue to lag the cost of production, particularly over the last 5 years. So we recognize that further we need a lot more technical assistance, a lot more engineering services, looking at retrofitting current storages, planning new projects, etc. Soil and water conservation districts, private planners, and private engineering is going to be needed to help significantly scale up the things that we're looking at doing here. So increasing funding for methane reduction through the state's climate resilient farming program. Fortunately, we have that. It's an opportunity to kind of step up, focus on projects that are ready to go, engage in pilots for other approaches to manure management and support the implementation of emerging technologies, which is happening at a fast pace, and including dewatering manure is something we're looking at. We have in the state a very aggressive agricultural environmental management framework. We call it an AIM program. It's a critical part of our marketing of New York Grown and Certified. But the idea of developing a carbon farm planning method using that program that could be available to farmers, supported by the technical assistance we already have in the soil and water conservation districts, Cornell Extension, and including the private sector. This is an opportunity for farmers to analyze and balance between greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration progressively and at the management level that's appropriate, and basically giving that farm a whole farm carbon footprint. It's important to have that baseline, and we see that further analysis could identify practice options to improve the carbon footprint of a farm. This would be based largely on some field-ready tools that we already have, tailored to New York State conditions. Clearly, we got to look at innovative funding. Some private funding exists for these projects, and obviously we'll work with other panels in developing and creating a market for methane, which could displace fossil fuels. So, next slide, please. Thank you. Livestock and dairy management. And here we're looking primarily at enteric fermentation and reducing methane through precision feed management. If we can feed cows better, correctly, and look at novel approaches like feed additives, more information, training, and outreach, technical assistance, this would be highly technical for producers at various scales, but a pretty cool idea. With regards to equity, I would just say that this recommendation identifies smaller farms in particular that may need some specific help and support. Obviously, again, this is another one that has upfront costs to a farm, and frankly needs sustained implementation in order to get a benefit. It's not a one and done kind of thing. It needs to be sustained. Some of these feed additives that can reduce methane require some interesting research to gauge efficacy, and some may even require FDA approval if you think about it. So this is a challenge here. Largely, this effort has been driven by Cornell University research, extension, and also some market forces, because feed is the largest input cost to dairies, and that's not going to change. So we're looking for opportunities here. I think the carbon farm plan template through AIM program, as we talked about, is a pretty cool way to drive this, but it should be noted that National Milk, our largest cooperative in the state, DFA, they have very good goals that they're put together already for dairy farms to be net zero by 2050. Irrespective of the state's initiative. So I think working with them and tracking progress towards this goal is a good strategy here as we go forward. Next slide, please.
And Richard, just a time check for you. You got 11 minutes.
Okay. I'll try to step it up a little bit. All right. Nitrogen nutrient management. Obviously, we want to reduce emissions through expanding nutrient management planning and implementation. This is a very active area right now, a lot of on-farm research which is going on, looking at nutrient management guidelines and tools that are used by planters and the fertilizer industry as well as farmers. A lot of research here, a lot of training, a lot of technical assistance. Again, this is a practice that demands sustained implementation in order to have a continued benefit. One of the things we're looking at is potential for crop insurance to cover the risk of innovating or insurance discounts, et cetera, with reducing nitrogen practices. I think this is very applicable to our cash grain farms especially. And we're looking at the feasibility of establishing nitrogen efficacy crop contests maybe to promote further adoption of efficient practices while keeping the yields up. And we'd like to expand that strategy to include greenhouse gas emission in manure application management as well. So kind of exciting. This is an area of intense interest by the entire farm community. And nutrient management, obviously, a very key factor in crop yield and quality, and frankly, profitability on a farm. So additional steps can be taken by farmers, and we got to figure out how to communicate that to consumers so they recognize that as an important value. Next slide, please. Soil health and regenerative agricultural practices is really the topic of intense interest in the industry. Increasing carbon sequestration through soil health management is very, very exciting. So as previously stated about the equity piece, I won't restate that, but I think that in this case, these practices have the potential to really elevate local food production, water quality, air quality, and very much storm and flood mitigation. So another one that's got some great benefits there. There's an awful lot of uncertainty and in increasing soil carbon. So verifying the benefits can be challenging. The equipment affordability and access is a barrier to widespread adoption, and planting windows for cover crops are, very narrow sometimes. And again, practices need to be sustained to realize a real benefit. We're looking here at establishing a payment for practice mechanism that could help that become a reality. Next slide, please. We're getting into agroforestry here, incorporating trees into areas of agricultural production that have the potential to really increase carbon sequestration and also a lot of other environmental benefits. These have the potential to really help with the food production, water quality, air quality again as well. The upfront cost and learning curve are challenging. Potential for lost income with practices like riparian forest buffers, et cetera. We need a culture shift, and we're going to need some more research here. So I think a takeaway here, payment for practice mechanism is very important. We do have a funding track, I think, with climate resilient farming to get at agroforestry as well. That can be very helpful for the technical design services that are needed. Next slide, please. This one deals with land use conversions, ag production and access. We need to maintain our land base for food production. Obviously, we want to reduce sprawl, we want to sequester and store carbon, and we want to avoid vehicle emissions associated with development. I would mention that here, trying to provide farmland access and affordability for beginning farmers and farmers identifying as Black, Indigenous, or as people of color is very important here. Expanding funding and streamlining farmland production programming is something we work on all the time. We work with our municipalities, need to continue to do that. Intergenerational transfer and also leasing land to new farmers is an important thing in this slide. Next slide, please. keeping forests as forests. The goal is to maintain the land base of forest land that we have, to continue to sequester and store carbon for the long term. I think funding is a real challenge here. State and local legislation may be needed. There are nearly 700,000 forest landowners in New York. Many of them own less than 10 acres. So reaching them is going to be a real challenge. The demographics rather of forest landowners is very similar to that of farm landowners. They might be land rich and cash poor. So expanding land conservation efforts through conservation easements. Nonprofits can be a big player here, setting land conservation goals, looking at forest tax law changes, and exploring potential policy options to prevent conversion of forest land to different uses. Maybe the idea of no net loss of forest land policy coupled with a forest land mitigation bank. I think supporting our forest landowners and keeping their forests as forests and managing them to remain healthy is a very important consideration here. Okay, next slide, please. And here we're talking about urban forestry, increasing the percentage of tree canopy in urban and settlement areas can have substantial carbon benefits. Utilizing urban wood created for construction, regular maintenance to reduce waste and costs while storing carbon is great. Here's a great opportunity in the equity world for jobs and training, and we can target climate vulnerable communities here, those vulnerable to flooding, high heat. This would be an important consideration here. Obviously, funding, planting, maintenance resources, coordinating with other groups here, and local government implementation is going to be very important. I think we can go to the next slide. Where am I here? Slide 9. I think we covered this increased state-wide effort of forestation, planting trees on vacant land that was not previously forested, clearly, reforestation, replanting, increasing the area of forest land that will be necessary to achieve this goal. Locating and targeting the available land, recognizing competing land uses. That's going to take outreach to those tens of thousands of landowners that I mentioned, as well as numerous municipalities to scale up that effort in a big way. So I think here we need to prioritize areas of greatest need. There was a suggestion of a New York Tree Corps modeled after the Civilian Conservation Corps, also increasing the statewide nursery capacity and finding financial incentives for landowners. So we need to make it easier for landowners to establish and maintain forests. There's the takeaway here. Next slide, please. Improving the forest management that we have to maintain and increase carbon sequestration will help us get up from our current baseline. Scaling up and delivering these practices to those forest landowners is very important. So that base level of training, certification, and licensing, it's a tricky subject, but needs to be established for our forestry professionals. I think we got to look at 480A, the forest tax law. That may require some legislation, may require some increased state funding for that strategy to extend those services to get what we need there. I think that understanding the additional information needed to quantify the carbon benefit potential for New York forest lands and the rates for different management approaches will be important. Incentives to increase forest carbon through improved management, the technical and stewardship services, integrating forest carbon management into programs that we already have going. And again, that tax law could make a big difference here. All right, next slide, please. Enhancing the use and manufacture of New York grown forest products. We're looking at retaining and expanding forest product markets that we have. and using the financial tools that we have to help them manage their lands can have a huge benefit here. The price of wood over other products, overcoming the business climate in New York that may not be looking first to New York forest related products. A lot of New Yorkers don't live in rural settings. They're not used to seeing timber harvesting and other forest activities. They may not understand what's happening there. So overcoming some of the perceptions about forestry will be very important. So creating incentives through both public and private investment. The idea of right to practice forestry law, looking at building codes, outreach to builders and planners and architects, using the word more generically and generally to explore all those options is going to be good. So defining and verifying sustainability for the public will help inform people about how to use our forest products. Next slide, please. And this is the fun one, bioeconomy. Expanding markets for renewable bio-based feedstocks, which creates products that replace fossil fuels. So enhancing those markets for those products can have some pretty direct benefits to the state. More carbon sequestration, as well as the benefits that we get by substituting these products for fossil fuels. I think the existing economic challenges, the lack of commercial viability, the feedstock availability in New York State needs study. The supply chain needs to be looked at and evaluated. So how we maintain the current industries while reducing emissions, facilitating growth in new areas. And we can look at state procurement policies, incentives for buildings. We'll be talking with the housing panel about that, exploring specific sources of demand, such as renewable natural gas, co-located with industrial users. Again, we'll be talking with the waste panel and energy intensive industries advisory panels about that. So again, I see we have the opportunity today to lay the groundwork to have a very viable bioeconomy in the future. And again, I see that we're going to discuss this further on in our agenda. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. You all are doing quite a bit. It's impressive. Let's go to, we have two questions, looks like. Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Basil. Thank you, Richard. Your panel's covering a lot of material there. I'm really quite excited by much of what I hear, and I was pleased to hear you mention Cornell a few times as a Cornell faculty member. It's great to hear that we're engaged. I do want to make a couple of points, though. I think all of these goals and all these projects are laudable, but there are some potential conflicts between them, and there are also some sort of constraints on how far you can really push it. So let me start with making methane out of manure. I'm a great fan of that. I've pushed it hard. I've worked with farmers on it. I've also calculated that if we took all of the manure produced in New York State and made it into methane with the highest possible industrial efficiency, it would be less than 1% of the amount of methane we're now burning from natural gas. So it's a limited resource. It's worth doing, but I don't think we should be very careful not to oversell it. I also want to just point out that we should do all we can to sequester carbon in our agricultural soils for sure, but there are some issues there. If we use no-till agriculture to do that, it actually aggravates problems of nitrogen runoff and changes how we manage the nitrogen cycle. And we're concerned about nitrogen not just because of nitrous oxide as a greenhouse gas, but because the nitrogen is contributing severely to the degradation of water quality in our New York lakes now to HABs and things like that. So I think we need to be holistic in looking at those things. And finally, I was glad to hear your emphasis on forests. Forests sequester a huge amount of carbon relative to agricultural lands, and we really need to preserve them. And I just want to point out that in our local area, I own 100 acres of farmland. And the farm immediately adjacent to mine, it's a mixture of woodland and farm. They're now clear cutting 60 acres of forest right this moment and converting it into corn and soybean fields. It's land that hasn't been farmed in 160 years. It's really lousy land. That's why it's a forest. You talk to the farmer and he's doing it, the farmer owns it, he's doing it because of tax incentives. he's much better off tax-wise having it in lousy corn production than he is in forest. So we really do need to look at the tax laws and tax incentives there. So I'm glad that's on your radar screen. Thank you.
Yeah, in a big way. It's the land conversions. You know, a lot of people think it's trees being taken down to put a mall up or a subdivision, but in many cases it's for ag production. And you're right, we got to make sure we incentivize the right kind of behaviors. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. And it looks like we have Rose Harvey. Rose? Get on mute.
Okay. In terms of the runoff issue with water, there's both opportunities for co-benefits and then also conflict. And then trees actually seem to resolve that conflict in many ways. So I'm a big believer in the trees, but I understand planting and riparian right-of-ways or tree right-of-ways can impact the economics of the farmer. So I guess what I'm saying is that can we look at all of this through our water management and our money that is available for that, which is considerable at all levels of government, and think about where we can see the co-benefits and then also eliminate the conflicts. So that's A. And then B, just you talked about conservation easements and just tax incentives and other financial or other incentives to make those happen, including maybe the state, as they did in the Adirondacks, owning more easements or buying more easements.
Sure. We've had a very aggressive preservation program in New York State. We're one of the top 5 in the country now, and it's one that we continually look at and ways to improve. And I think the use of easements is an important tool. But I would add also, going back to your first point about water management, we've got pretty good tools here at Ag and Markets. That's where our focus has largely been, along with our partners at DEC, is looking at managing nutrients and water. And I think that's a giant co-benefit as we go forward here. Yeah, there's some challenges. Taking land out of production in some cases to make a buffer, to plant trees. But I think that concept I mentioned earlier on about, a whole carbon farm, carbon footprint on each specific farm is kind of an interesting way to go. But I think we've got good tools to look at water management that we just need to get out to more farms.
And congratulations on your program.
Thank you. It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah, it's good to hear yours.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Okay. So in total, we went over about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, but those are great presentations.
Well, if I could, Basil,
yep.
Only because I mentioned this last time, and I'm just very concerned to see a focus on renewable natural gas or any energy source that would not be, that would not qualify under the terms of the CLCPA. So I'm concerned about that. I know I mentioned it last time in context of this panel, but just wanted to say that again. Thank you.
Okay, and Ryan, we can take it up later as well.
Ahead, sure.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Doreen.
Well, I was going to say, Raya, you've come to the right place because one of our presentations is on the topic of bioenergy coming up. And I think, it's because of the feedback that you've provided that we really wanted to sort of level set where we are and talk about just that opportunity or challenges. So stay tuned. Basil's getting us there.
Trying to. Let's see what happens here. Okay, great. Next slide, please. So Waste Advisory Panel, this another item that has come out of the feedback from the various CIC meetings we've done. I mentioned last time, I believe we voted last time to create one. And we are doing that and hope to bring this to a vote today. But I will introduce Martin Brand, Deputy Commissioner at DEC for all things hazardous waste, solid waste, Superfund, all the fun stuff. Martin Brand, take it away.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? Somebody give me a nod.
We hear you.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today and the opportunity to actually to chair this waste advisory panel. By way of introduction, I'll just talk a little bit about myself for a second. Basil is being very kind when he mentions what I do. I think normally he describes it as every dirty job that comes along in the state is in my portfolio. But I am the Deputy Commissioner for the Office of Remediation and Materials Management at DEC. So I oversee the divisions of environmental remediation, materials management, and mineral resources. And I also have a big statewide leadership role in the response to emerging contaminants and other water quality issues. So my portfolio includes pest management, solid and hazardous waste, sustainability, recycling, Superfund, brownfields remediation, oil and gas regulation, mineral resources, and spill response. So it's an active bunch. So again, thank you for this opportunity. In a minute, I'm going to put the slide over and talk about the proposed panel members that we want to put before the CAC for consideration. But I'll just mention that the waste panel obviously is going to have the same charge as the other panels to take a look at the range of emissions reductions consistent with with the CAC for the sectors which contribute to the statewide emission limits and concerns. So we'll obviously be doing just what the other panels are doing to present a list of recommendations for reduction strategies, policies, programs, and actions moving forward. Now, we are getting off to a late start. So to that end, we have been working for the last few weeks now to create a DEC staff working group along with other agencies, including NYPA, to really get a jump start on this work. We're creating foundation of the structure and starting to generate that information and that baseline to help the panel hit the ground running. So we've been working on putting together information on the current status of waste management in the state, looking at metrics and facilities, disposal, waste categories, those type of things. We've been attempting to define and prioritize the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from the waste management sector. So obviously looking at things like landfills and wastewater management, materials handling, and those type of things. And we're continuing to work on the refining the quantification of emissions from the waste sectors. So all those things we're teeing up for the panel, and obviously we're going to have to schedule a number of sessions and probably take advantage of breaking the group into sub-panels to take those deeper dives into the various categories in order to work in parallel and try to catch up to the other panels. And our next output for all of you to see will be to present our draft work plan for presentation at the next CAC meeting on December 15th. But we've already started to work on that and set forth the templates for that effort. Next slide, please. So here's suggestions that we have for consideration for the Climate Action Council for the members of the Waste Advisory Panel. A number of these are familiar names to many of you that kind of work in this arena, and we have had some discussions with the members of the council on some of these individuals. I'll just briefly kind of run down the list of names and where they're from as you can kind of take a look at this slide. But we have Michael Cahill, attorney at Germano and Cahill. We have John Casella, who's the chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Casella Waste Systems. Steve Changaris is Vice President for the Northeast Region for the National Waste and Recycling Association. Risa Domino, Senior Consultant for Resource Recycling Systems. Dan Egan, who's the Executive Director of Feeding New York State, which is the Food Bank Association of New York. Jane Gajwani, the Director of the Office of Energy and Resource Recovery Programs, New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Paul Gilman, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for Covanta. Gareth Glantz, who's the Executive Director for the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency. Eric Goldstein, Senior Attorney and New York City Environmental Director, Natural Resources Defense Council. Dr. Alan Hershkowitz, who goes by many different titles, but he's the Environmental Science Advisor to the New York Yankees and is a former Senior Scientist and Director of the Solid Waste Programs at the NRDC. Dr. Toke Oyewole, Policy and Communications Organizer for the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And I apologize if I mishandled her name, but I've been practicing. And Lauren Toretta, President and Partner of CH4 Biogas. And there's a new addition here. As you'll see, we have a couple of these balloons here that don't have names associated with them. And we're still working on a couple of these placeholders to work for good candidates, but a late submission for another environmental justice representative came in, was nominated by Rhea Salter. I appreciate that nomination, and we're pleased to submit Bridget Vicente as named for consideration as well. She's a lifelong New York City Housing Authority resident. She's the founder of the Inner City Green Team, and for at least a decade, she's led the fight for herself and fellow residents in their right to recycle in New York City. So we're pleased to present this entire slate here. You'll see a couple placeholders, one for a wastewater expert and one for a labor representative. We had a couple of sort of late withdrawals from our list of candidates, and we've advanced a couple of names. We're going through that vetting process and confirmation process now, and would ask to come back to the group at some point in the future for consideration of these two additional persons to join the panel. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Commissioner Segos.
Great. Well, I'd like to open it up to any questions. We'd like to take this to a vote, but certainly want to have you all weigh in if you have questions or concerns, and then we'll move to a vote. I see Gary, you've got an old hand up. Rose, I'm not sure if is that new? And I think you just put yours up.
Yeah, mine's old.
Okay. Ann.
Yeah, my question is quick. I'm just wondering what labor unions are most active in the industrial waste sector, not industrial waste, but in the waste industry.
Teamsters.
Yeah, the Teamsters certainly are a huge player. They represent a huge proportion of the transportation aspects for the solid waste infrastructure in the state. So sanitation workers, garbage collection trucks, almost any vehicle that's out there associated with the solid waste industry. Certainly the Teamsters have a huge representation. There's a number of other labor groups that represent workers in different trades that are associated with solid waste as well. So they have a pretty big role in the solid waste infrastructure in the state.
And Commissioner Reardon, did you have anything to add on that?
Yes, there are a number of different labor unions that represent across the state, and we would be very happy to work with you, Martin. We have really good relationships with most of them, and I know they'd love to have an opportunity to be a part of this.
Appreciate that. We will.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions. So with that, we'll move to a vote. Can I have a motion to approve?
I'll move it, Donna. Donna will move it.
Okay. Second.
Second.
Okay, great. I'll turn it over to Valerie for roll call.
Sure. When I call, please acknowledge your vote on the resolution adopting the advisory panel as presented today.
Maybe say again, it was breaking up a bit. Gary, can you go on mute?
Hi.
I think I heard you, Doreen.
Yes, it was an aye from Doreen.
Co-Chair Segos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball,
Aye.
Donna DeCarolis,
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Aye.
Kevin Donahue,
I just want to make a quick mention to thank Martin and Commissioner Sagos for working with us on this panel. It's a good group of folks, and so I just thought I should acknowledge that reach out effort by them. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
Dennis Elsenbeck,
Aye.
CEO Falcone,
Aye.
Commissioner Gertler or Kevin Hansen.
Aye, and this is Kevin Hansen on behalf of Commissioner Gert.
Perfect, thank you. Rose Harvey,
Aye.
Bob Howarth,
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz,
Gavin's comments gives me a little bit of pause, but I'll vote aye.
Chancellor Malatros,
Aye.
I only know why he says pause because there's a Yankees affiliated individual on this panel. So deal with it, Red Sox.
CEO Quinones,
Aye.
Commissioner Reardon,
Aye.
Ann Reynolds,
Aye.
Chair Rhodes,
Aye.
Keisha Santiago Martinez,
Aye.
Maya Sol-
Aye.
Paul Shepson,
Aye.
Commissioner Visnauskas,
Aye.
Henry Splitoff,
I think Gary Ginsburg may be
or
on.
Gary Ginsburg.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you. With that, the resolution is adopted.
Excellent. Congratulations, everybody. Really glad to get this finally impaneled. And Martin, you got your work cut out for you, but I know you can do it. You've done it on so many things over the years. Congratulations. Got a note that, John, you wanted to raise something on the Power Gen panel?
Yes, thanks, panel. Basil, for everybody's awareness, it's John Rhodes, Power Gen panel. During our last meeting, I think you'll recall that I noted that we were thinking about additional labor representation on the Power Gen panel. What I was thinking and now what I want to bring forward is that we inadvertently left Utilities Workers Union of America Local 1-2 off of our advisory panel slate. So I'd like to ask now for the council's approval to add Jim Slevin from Local 1-2 to that panel. This is, I believe, a Climate Action Council action, but I think you'll see the merits of the addition, and I hope you'll be in favor of it.
Are there any questions for John? Let's see. I don't see any hands raised. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve adding Jim Slevin from Local 1-2 to the Power Gen panel?
Can I move it? It's John.
I don't know if you can. Will anyone else?
I'll move it.
Okay. Second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Valerie, would you like to do the roll on this?
Absolutely. When I call your name, please acknowledge your vote on the resolution approving the additional member to the Power Generation Advisory Panel. Co-Chair Harris?
Aye.
Co-Chair Sagos?
Aye.
Commissioner Ball?
Aye.
Donna DeCarolis?
Aye.
Commissioner Dominguez?
Aye.
Gavin Donahue?
Aye.
Dennis Elsenbeck?
Aye.
CEO Falcone?
Aye.
Kevin Hansen?
Aye.
Rose Harvey? Bob Howarth?
Aye.
Peter Iwanowitz?
Aye.
Chancellor Malatros?
Aye.
CEO Quinones? Commissioner Reardon?
Aye.
Ann Reynolds,
Aye.
Chair Rhodes,
Aye.
Keisha Santiago Martinez,
Aye.
Jess Salter,
Aye.
Paul Shepson,
Aye.
Commissioner Visnauskas,
Aye.
Barry Ginsburg.
Aye.
Excellent. With that, the resolution is adopted.
Excellent. John, thank you for raising that. And good luck with that panel. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, bioenergy, we noted that we'd be talking about this more extensively. We're going to have two presentations on this. The first from John Binder, who is Chief in the Bureau of Energy and Climate Change here at the Office of General Counsel at DC. He's going to talk about the discussion of bioenergy within the CLCPA. And Carl Maas will provide a refresher on bioenergy from the Pathways presentation. Actually, it's a three-part. We're then going to get Commissioner Ball back to talk about the concept of a bioeconomy. We'll pause after each of those speakers for a good Q&A. Without further ado, John, would you kick things off?
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Sagos. Hopefully you can hear me. My video camera doesn't seem to be working, but
You're
I
good.
will go ahead without it.
Yep,
Thank you very much. So I wanted to give a quick overview of some of the key statutory provisions in the Climate Act around bioenergy. And I think the goal here is to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the statute says, and also to perhaps address what some folks might misconstrue about the law. And that's particularly whether the statute actually prohibits the use of bioenergy from contributing to the goals of the law. So there's three provisions in the statute that I want to talk about. And bear with me a bit because I will provide the statutory citations like any good lawyer. So first of all, the first point is the alternative compliance mechanism. And this is a provision in the statute in section 750109 of the Environmental Conservation Law, subdivision 4. And this provision, the alternative compliance mechanism, establishes limits on the department's ability to use an ACM, sometimes referred to as offsets, to comply with emission limits and to achieve the net zero emission goal of the law. But the key to understand here is that this is a potential mechanism that DEC may establish, but is not required to. And at this time, we have not made any determination regarding the establishment of an alternative compliance mechanism. So if the department were to establish an alternative compliance mechanism, this provision of the CLCPA does have limits on its use. That includes for the fact that we can only use it to account for up to 15% of the state's emissions, estimated as a percentage of 1990 emissions. And it does include a prohibition on the use of this mechanism for crediting biofuels for energy or for transportation purposes. But again, that is only if we were to adopt the alternative compliance mechanism. So that's point number one. Point number two, it goes to the definition of renewable and provisions of the Public Service Law. The Climate Act also added Public Service Law, Section 66P, which is regarding the establishment of a renewable and clean energy program by the Public Service Commission. And this statutory section includes a definition for the phrase renewable energy systems. And that definition lists various technologies that are eligible. But the important thing is that it addresses the electricity demand that must be supplied by renewable energy systems. It does not address things like alternatives that might be utilized for space heating or for thermal processes. And while that definition does not list biomass combustion, in its order modifying the Clean Energy Standard, which folks referenced earlier today, the Public Service Commission noted that it will continue to direct NYSERDA to continue honoring its obligations under existing contracts with biomass and biogas resources, and will do that through 2029. But finally, with respect to this Public Service Law provision and the definition of renewable, there's a separate requirement in the Public Service Law for 100% clean energy or carbon-free energy by 2040. That is not on its face under the statute. subject to the same definition of renewable energy systems. And this is something that the Commission, the Public Service Commission, will be responsible for implementing going forward. And then before I get to the last point, I did want to reference another provision of the law, and that's regarding emissions from livestock. So a lot of folks are familiar with a provision in the law that says agricultural emissions from livestock cannot be directly regulated by DEC, and that is in ECL 750109 sub 2B. But even though the department cannot directly regulate those emissions, they are included in the overall statewide greenhouse gas emissions that determine the emission limits and the emissions accounting under the law. And we can utilize non-regulatory policies to address those emissions from livestock. And then finally, there is a separate process under the law for accounting for annual emissions going forward. So we've spoken in past council meetings about DEC's pending rulemaking that would establish emission limits based on 1990 emission levels. That is called Part 496, and we have completed the public comment process and are reviewing those now. But separate from that rulemaking effort, which looks back in time to 1990, we also have a going forward obligation to provide an annual report on greenhouse gas emissions. And that is section 75-0105 of the Environmental Conservation Law. And part of that provision talks about how the department is to include information regarding emissions from non-fossil fuel sources, including biomass combustion. And this is something that the department intends to develop an appropriate accounting methodology for as part of our development of the initial report over the course of 2021. Where we will soon begin stakeholder outreach on this and other elements of the annual report. And again, this is separate from the 40 by 30 and the 85 by 50 emission limits. As noted, we're going to be receiving additional input on that going forward throughout 2021. We anticipate our draft release sometime in the middle of 2021. And the final point I'll make is that, of course, the department is also responsible for promulgating substantive regulations to implement the recommendations of the council that will be in the scoping plan. And that could certainly include recommendations regarding bioenergy emissions. So with that, apologies for not being on video, but I will turn it back to Commissioner Sagos. Thank you.
John, thanks. Any questions for John on the background he just gave? I see Raya and then Bob Howarth. Raya?
It's not so much it's a question. You know, I appreciate your statements, your interpretations. I want to be clear. Yet certainly, you know, the PSC in 2029 is a very short time frame to be, you know, planning around, you know, honoring current commitments. And while we are certainly listening and waiting very intently for any offset proposal, you know, what those will look like writ large, also specifically related to biomass, until those emerge, I just want to be clear that they are not a part of the picture. And of course, one thing that was not mentioned is that certainly biomass is something that needs to be very carefully looked at under our emissions limits. So I just, you know, thank you for, you know, talking about the CLCPA, talking about the provisions of biomass. I just personally want to convey that, you know, it is not proposed as an offset yet, to my understanding. You know, I get that there are ongoing commitments, ongoing regulations in this area. In particular, the need to monitor them to limit them. And anyway, so just wanting to say that, to me, going to my point earlier, anything that, you know, it is not just, I don't think that we need to get creative to think about, you know, how we can fit in planning for something that in my understanding, is not contemplated as part of the core mission of the CLCPA's goals of reducing emissions writ large. So just it's a bit of a rant, but thank you for your comment. Just responding to, really, it's more of a response for the record.
Right, thanks. John, do you have any reactions?
I'll just acknowledge that we have not made the determination, like I said, about establishing the offset mechanism or the alternative compliance mechanism. And you're certainly correct that the commission will be addressing this further as it implements the modifications to the Clean Energy Standard. But you're right, and finally, you're right that this is part of the emission limits, which we have in our pending rulemaking.
Okay. Thanks, John. Bob.
Thank you. Your presentation is helpful to me as a non-lawyer. I know a lot about bioenergy, but not so much about the legal aspects here. But let me ask you one question. Under the definitions, it says that greenhouse gas emissions offset projects can include, and then it specifically says anaerobic digesters, which of course are one form of bioenergy, where the biogas that's produced is used locally. That's in the definition section. Would that have any applicability under the CLCPA beyond the alternative compliance mechanism?
That provision, the definition of offsets, is really mostly utilized in that alternative compliance mechanism provision. So that's really the focus of it, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Gavin.
John, good to hear your voice. A question that I think is on the tip of everybody's tongue here, at least that's interested in the subject. You said a lot. I appreciate all the information, but what I didn't hear from you is, does renewable natural gas fall within your definition interpretation or not? I'm still unclear where renewable natural gas fits in this presentation. Maybe you can help me.
Which definition are you referring to? Sorry.
I mean, in your interpretation on the alternative compliance mechanism, where does renewable natural gas fit in this, if it does?
I think it's not directly addressed in the alternative compliance mechanism language, so it's something that we will be addressing going forward in these various policies that we've been talking about, whether it's the council's consideration of these policies, whether it's the annual inventory report, or whether it's other policies that we might adopt going forward.
John, I appreciate you laying that out there. It's an important piece of information that we've been looking to get to, and thank you very much for that.
Jared, did you have a point to make?
Well, I guess I would just say that, as John pointed out, renewable natural gas would not be eligible for as an offset project under the alternative compliance mechanism. That provision doesn't say anything about how it might play into other policies that are developed by the Climate Action Council. And, among those are policies that we, heard about today, like policies that that Commissioner Ball mentioned in the agriculture sector. And I think Ann wanted to say something.
Yep. Ann?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, to John's presentation, I feel like I get it all, except for the very first thing he mentioned about the alternative compliance mechanisms. And I was wondering if he could repeat that again, slightly slower, and maybe sort of provide a hypothetical example of, knowing that it's hypothetical and DEC hasn't decided, but I think it would be illustrative for the group to say what a hypothetical example might be.
Well, if you're referring to the first point I made, which is that we're not required to adopt an alternative compliance mechanism, the statute provides us with the ability to, and only if we were to adopt one would any of the various prohibitions in that provision kick in. And that includes regarding the use of biogas, as Jared was just referring to. So the point is that these prohibitions in this provision only apply if we were to determine that we were going to adopt an alternative compliance mechanism. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Ann.
You probably did answer it, John. I'm just not getting it. Like, this is So hypothetical would be, say DEC had established a regulation on carbon emissions emission standards for something, some source of emissions. And then in theory, as long as something met those criteria, then that individual emission source could have an alternative compliance pathway. Right? It's sort of an alternative to what is what I'm asking, I guess.
Hey, Ann, it's Jared. Let me take a shot at it. So, yes, let's say there's a regulation that says a particular source category's emissions are limited to X, and I'll just throw a number, 10, and let's say their emissions are actually 12. We could not develop an offset mechanism that says you can create 2 tons of offsets by using a renewable fuel elsewhere. Okay? But in our accounting for greenhouse gas emissions, if a determination is made that renewable natural gas has lower greenhouse gas emissions than conventional natural gas, and that facility uses renewable natural gas, its emissions might not be 12, they might be 9, if the renewable natural gas has a lower carbon intensity. And that work is still underway to evaluate, those, that accounting for the greenhouse gas emissions associated with renewable energy and that whole entire accounting framework. So, what I'd say is there's a lot of work still to be done in this area, both by the advisory panels and then by DEC in developing the accounting framework in a public process.
Yeah. In that particular example, say there was a landfill that was leaking methane and someone they could propose to DEC, we will capture that methane and prevent it from being leaked into the environment in an equivalent amount of that to get from 12 to 10, for example.
If there was a standard that applied to that landfill, yes.
That was above and beyond that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I hope this is helpful to other people and it's not just a rabbit hole for me, but in my interpretation is that the alternative compliance mechanism options are rather narrow, and there's a lot of criteria applied to them that you'll have to apply to them.
Okay. We had Donna and then Peter.
Thank you, Basil. To Jared's point, I just wanted to point out, I just think this is a really good analysis. It's a good discussion to be having. I'm also confused by it, Anne, so you're not alone. I think the example, Jared, that you provided is a really good one, and I just hope that we evaluate these pathways like RNG that can be helpful. I just want to give you a quick example. In our region, which is 11 counties in Western New York, we right now have 17 projects trying to connect into our utility system. And however that energy gets allocated, I don't know if it'll get allocated for the benefit of heating in New York State or if it'll go to California in concept. But it's really a pathway that we think is a very good one. And in our case, that volume, and that's just that volume. This is not estimates of volume. These are real projects. Would roughly cover 30,000 residential homes, the equivalent energy usage. So I think it's a good pathway, and I just appreciate the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Donna. Peter.
Yeah, I just want a real quick point, because I know we're getting late in the day, but John made a point at the beginning. The alternative compliance pathway really only applies to 15% of the emissions, the overall emissions, and there are a lot of guardrails placed in the program itself. Maybe we want to do a deeper dive as a council to really understand this piece of it. And I think that while the alternative compliance pathway is about net zero emissions, again, it's just for that 15%. And there are a lot of tremendous guardrails that have been put into this program at the behest of our EJ partners who have been representing Black and Brown communities who have been historically disadvantaged by offset programs and these alternative compliance programs. So we all have debt of gratitude for them for digging in and getting this section of law done, and we should live up to the spirit of it as we advance this discussion.
Thanks, Peter. Ann, did you put your hand back up, or is that an old one?
I did. At what point do I get kicked off for asking too many questions?
We'll vote you off soon.
My last renewable natural gas thing is that more and more of this topic is coming up. I know it's come up in several of the panels. It comes up here. It comes up in other arenas at DPS and at the ISO. And I just wanted to throw out the concept of what I've heard people say is that the actual potential for renewable natural gas is a small fraction of either the amount of fuel used for heating, the amount of fuel used for electricity, or the amount of fuel used for transportation. And I'm wondering, no one has to answer it now, but if there's any research in New York or across the country about the highest and best use of a limited supply of renewable natural gas in an economy that's trying to reduce its carbon emissions so dramatically like New York is. There might in fact be, for example, an alternative to renewable natural gas for heating, but not for the last 3% of electricity generation. And there probably would be a cost associated with renewable natural gas use in each of those three sectors. And so it is probably something that should be looked into. And there I will stop.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Raya?
Just that I just want to say, perhaps say again that, absent a proposal to include this, type of energy, which is, we're looking to end our use of natural gas in New York State. I just don't, Jared, could you clarify about why the panel should be looking at that as a source? Before, my opinion would be that the panel should not be focused, with so many things to focus on, should not be focused on, on these kinds of proposals that, as we talked about, don't meet the definitions in the law and have not yet been proposed, although I do understand it is walking forward. So that's, and I appreciate the discussion and what folks have said, and that'll be my bit said.
Yeah, Raya, I'd just like to say that I'm not, recommending, and we're not recommending, that the panels consider the use of renewable natural gas. The presentation, that John provided is just trying to provide, a background on what the statute says about the use of bioenergy and what it doesn't say. And it's really up to the council to determine what should go into the scoping plan. So the panels will provide their, recommendations to the council, but they're just advisory. It's up to the council to decide, whether there should be or should not be a role for renewable natural gas in the scoping plan that comes out of this process.
But it wouldn't be for the council to decide if it wasn't legal. I said that I was going to say my piece. I really have said my piece.
Right, and that was the purpose of John's presentation, to identify what exactly the statute says about how renewable energy or bioenergy can be used and how it can't be used in the CLCPA.
Yes, thanks, Raya, and thank you all for the feedback. When listening to all of this and really thinking about what we had envisioned for our next two presentations. You know, one of them was a presentation from Carl Maas around some aspects of the E3 study on pathways, which would look at the role, you know, potential roles of bioenergy in the path to carbon neutrality. However, it does seem, given the late hour and given how in-depth I think we really need to dig on this issue, I would sort of make a suggestion to all of us, and specifically to my co-chair, that we have another meeting coming up on the 15th of December. I think it could make sense for us to digest this a bit between now and then, come back on the 15th and unpack this more extensively, given the multitude of issues that have been raised. And I think what we need to provide is a pretty comprehensive presentation on this topic in 3 short weeks. If you agree, Basil, I would suggest that instead of moving to Carl and Commissioner Ball, we might want to just sort of take this up as a primary agenda item for next month.
Yep, fully agree, Doreen. As long as everyone else is okay. I don't see any hands. Let's do that.
Gavin's ready.
Gavin? I don't see Gavin on here.
He was waving his hand.
Oh. Did you want to speak, Gavin?
Oh, Basil, I was just saying I'm good with that. I thought that was a
Okay.
good idea. Thank you. No, I was just waving. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, it's admittedly a critically important discussion. I do fear we're not going to give it justice in the next half hour.
Okay. Good. Okay, sounds good. We'll pass that on.
Hey, Basil, just a quick recommendation. I'm happy we're going to move it on too. But Doreen, do you know if we're going to dig into deeply, like, the potential for life cycle analysis on this bioenergy and biofuels discussion? I think that's really important to understand the full life cycle of these things and what's good and what isn't good when it comes to biofuels. There's a lot that isn't, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think, Carl, maybe you want to jump in here. I mean, I know we don't have a full assessment available, but I do think we can dig more deeply than in the initial presentation that was provided to the council.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Moss. For those who don't know me, I direct energy and environmental analysis at NYPA. Among other hats, we do long-term energy planning and climate action planning for the state. Yeah, there are certainly life cycle analyses that are in the public domain. You can look to California work around low carbon fuel standard. There are a number of other studies. So certainly we can dig into some of that and bring some of that work forward.
Thanks, Carl. And thanks, Peter.
And looking forward to chatting with you all next time.
If I might just jump in here for a minute, this is Bob. I agree with I agree with the decision to postpone it, and I agree with Peter that how we handle the life cycle assessment is critical. And I just want to, I chaired an international advisory committee on that a decade ago. We have a 500-page report on life cycle assessments of biofuels I'd be happy to share. And I would point out that the European Union is the world's leader in how to think about this. They're way ahead of what the state of California has done, which in my mind is quite behind the 8 ball. So I'd suggest we look at what the EU guidelines are.
Okay. Bob, thank you. All right, so that takes us all the way up to agency updates. I'm going to turn it over to Jared and Maureen to talk about value of carbon and what they're up to. We are up to here at DC on that. Jared?
Sure, thank you. And let's go to the next slide, please. Actually, the one after that. So, and I think this is sort of a repeat of a slide we showed at a previous meeting. DEC has been developing a value of carbon guidance. There's enough, various terms in the CLCPA that really prescribe what we should be looking at in that value of carbon guidance. So we've done that work. We put out a guidance document on establishing a value of carbon for consideration last month. The comment period is open for another few days until November 27th. So that's Friday, and we just wanted to give the council an update of what we propose in that guidance document. We have to finalize it by the end of the year, according to the statute. So, we're going to be busy in the first part of December, considering those public comments that came in and finalizing the document. But let me now turn it over to Maureen to talk about, what's in the guidance itself.
Thanks, Jared. Next slide, please. So we're going to provide a quick briefing for the council on some of the content in the current draft guidance that's out for public comment. DEC and NYSERDA worked together to develop the guidance document. In alignment with the requirements under the statute, we considered the damages approach and the marginal abatement cost approach. The guidance is structured around the U.S. Interagency Working Group's damages-based value of carbon, which is also referred to as the social cost of carbon, more commonly known, as most appropriate for most agency decision-making. So the guidance is meant to be a tool for agencies to help them have a consistent approach to applying a value of carbon in their decision-making. We considered a range of discount rates, and we had help bringing those numbers up to current dollars. We're recommending that agencies stay within the range of 1% to 3%, and we're seeking comment on the most appropriate central value, whether that be a 2 or a 2.5% discount rate. And that translates into either $125 or $79 per ton of carbon dioxide. We also looked at other non-CO2 greenhouse gases, and the Interagency Working Group, under the Obama administration, did a lot of modeling. They have numbers for carbon dioxide, for nitrous oxide, and for methane. So we also provided those numbers in current dollars and for those different discount rates. There's other gases that we consider in our emissions reductions. There's values are not available for those specific gases at this time, but this is an area of rapidly evolving work in the academic world. So as those methods of estimating those values improve and there's more peer review and consensus around those numbers or how to appropriately model those numbers, we can modify the guidance to include those. And it's also worth noting there's some confusion around the 20-year global warming potential that the CLCPA requires we use in our emissions accounting. So since this guidance has specific values for individual gases, the 20-year global warming potential metric doesn't apply. You have a gas-specific number rather than a conversion factor from carbon dioxide to a specific gas. And again, it's worth reminding and reinforcing that this is a guidance document and it's not a regulation. It's not setting a carbon price or imposing a fee. Next slide, please. So the purpose and the use of the guidance, the reason why DEC put out this guidance, it quite frankly is the statute requires it. CLCPA directed DEC to establish it. And it's helpful to have a reference document for agencies to have a consistency in their approach when they consider and start adding climate change considerations and greenhouse gas considerations to their decision making. And it's instructions for state staff to help for all sorts of different purposes as they're through regulations or procurement decisions or many other applications. So again, this is not a carbon price, this is not a fee, but this is just a guidance to aid agencies when they are understanding the value of the emissions reductions actions that they may undertake in their work. So that's a quick briefing on the content. Again, as Jared mentioned, this is still open for public comment. We really encourage individuals and folks to read the guidance, read the companion document, and provide their comments to us. Happy to answer any questions at this time.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm curious about the extent to which there is a need to look for consistency with the Climate Mobilization Act, which does set a price on carbon for buildings that are not in compliance. Just sort of for coherence, is there an interaction with New York City and how they went about setting a price on carbon for that legislation?
So we did not work with the city on our guidance. They're kind of separate jurisdictions in terms of the guidance that we have is appropriate for state agencies, and the city did have local law 97 already, in effect and rolling prior to us releasing this draft.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Bob?
Yes, thank you. I submitted formal written comments yesterday, but let me just mention a few of them now for the sake of my colleagues here on the Climate Action Council. I think the guidance did a good job overall with the carbon dioxide. The IWG did a good job with that. Although the discount rate, of course, is critical, as you showed in your slide. The difference between a 1% and a 3% rate is incredible. And I'm wondering why, let me give a comment, but ask a question first. Why we wouldn't want to just specify one discount rate that's used by all state agencies. Letting it float around from agency to agency sounds very confusing to me. I also want to point out that the value for methane, which is in the report, is from the IWG. It's actually based on a report that's 8 years old, although it says 2015. They never updated it. It's way out of date on methane science. And the draft document you have says that ideally one should include not only the climate change costs for methane, but the indirect effects on human health, et cetera, et cetera. That's been done. There are several peer-reviewed papers which have done it. They're actually cited in your document, and yet you don't use them. And the United Nations Environmental Program is putting out formal guidance on that in about 9 to 10 weeks, I believe. So I would very strongly urge DEC to use that as opposed to the 8-year-old IWG material for methane. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that feedback. And again, being a guidance provides a lot of flexibility for us to keep updating the document as better information becomes available, like you're mentioning now. So we do intend, to keep this alive and continually updated. And with regards to the range, the range is sort of it's a common practice, and while it is broad, it also does narrow the potential universe of discount rates that could be applied. And different agencies have differing needs and differing levels of familiarity with applying such a value to their decisions. So the range is meant to be respectful of that need for flexibility. We are seeking comment on a central value, which I think will be helpful in situations like you're raising, where people just want one number. So that should be helpful with, and we welcome your comments on which is the appropriate central value to recommend.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, Maureen, Jared, thank you. Paul, thanks for the question. So if we go to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Chris Cull for a discussion of the interim approach to disadvantaged communities. Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Commissioner. For everyone, a quick introduction. So I'm Chris Cole. I'm the Director for Energy Affordability and Equity at NYSERDA, and part of what I do at NYSERDA is work with colleagues across state agencies and with community-based organizations to help advance our energy equity goals within NYSERDA. And so what I want to do today is provide you all with an update on how the state is thinking about, disadvantaged communities while the Climate Justice Working Group is doing their work to develop the criteria and approach for identifying disadvantaged communities to advance the objectives of the law. So next slide, please. So maybe to start off, just a quick refresh on how disadvantaged communities are treated within the CLCPA. So the law provides general guidance on disadvantaged communities with respect to identifying them based on geographic, socioeconomic, and also environmental and health hazard criteria. The law also sets a goal for disadvantaged communities to receive 40% of the benefits of the spending on clean energy and energy efficiency. The law is or has identified the Climate Justice Working Group as the body to decide, what constitutes a disadvantaged community, and also outlines a set of processes to obtain public input and ultimately kind of land on a final set of criteria. Based on the work necessary here, we're expecting that the Climate Justice Working Group will be in a position to draft the criteria for a disadvantaged community sometime in early 2021. And will then be responsible for holding at least 6 public statement hearings, and then also DEC will be publishing the criteria, the draft criteria for a disadvantaged community on the website for further public comment. So it's looking like we won't have a final definition in place until Q3 of 2021. So it's going to be important for us to think about, how to start to think about and treat disadvantaged communities between now and that point in time. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of the level of work and kind of where it's focused on today, the Climate Justice Working Group is starting to identify the priority indicators for disadvantaged communities. So I think based on the last Climate Justice Working Group meeting, we have something like 100+ indicators that the working group members are interested in further exploring to consider as part of the final definition. And the working group is currently developing a rubric to help with the screening and assessment of those criteria. So as I mentioned earlier, we expect to have some draft criteria in Q1 of next year, and then kind of following the process outlined in the law, we'd have a final definition later in 2021. As the working group is thinking about this, this definition and in the work ahead, it's a pretty complex undertaking, as you can imagine. The working group needs to assess the various indicators that would be part of any final definition, and also think about, how those indicators may be suited to kind of meet the objectives of the CLCPA, look at what data is available, to understand kind of those indicators, level availability, granularity, how frequency that data is updated. So as we think about using kind of available data for a final definition, we want to ensure that the data is of good quality and will be able to be updated as necessary. Further, the working group is going to have to think about various methodological considerations for developing an approach that is really considering
how to kind of include, disparate or otherwise distinct data sets that can, get us to a point where we have a composite definition, and look at kind of how we're accounting for geographic balance, the potential for weighting or indexing various indicators. So there's a lot of work that is currently underway, and the group will be undertaking over the next several months. And then, beyond that, obviously, we're going to be looking to gain input from communities and from stakeholders to ensure that we're thinking about how the indicators that we're identifying kind of within the working group actually kind of reflect the needs and the issues within communities. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, there's a need that we've identified to start to conceptualize what a disadvantaged community would be today, prior to a final definition being established, to help guide some of the investments that the state is making now and is getting ready to make now. A couple of examples on the clean energy side of things, with the Public Service Commission with the Make Ready order, looking at how to incentivize and encourage EV charging within disadvantaged communities. Within NYSERDA, we have the New York Sun portfolio and a focus on solar equity. So looking at how we can encourage and prioritize solar adoption within underserved communities. We're also thinking about the need to, as these early investments are being made, build out some kind of level setting and consistency across state agencies. So where we're in a position where investments and benefits can be tracked. We also want to think about indicators that have some familiarity with communities and the market. And I think most importantly, we want to make sure that, we're starting with indicators that will likely be represented in the final definition or final set of criteria for a disadvantaged community. There's a lot of work, as I mentioned, to kind of really think about the data and the indicators that the Climate Justice Working Group is interested in advancing. And so, we want to ensure here that we weren't making any decisions on data or indicators that will need to be made by the Climate Justice Working Group and informed through public comment. So what we've aligned on, and we'll get to that in the next slide, is a set of criteria that will likely be part of any final definition that the working group comes up with. And I guess the last thing I'll say on the criteria, as it relates to certain programs and investments, there may need to be some additional supplemental kind of considerations for how we establish priority, as we're thinking about workforce development or innovation work. We'll want to make sure that we're kind of really thinking about, kind of what are the characteristics of the residents and communities that we need to serve for those investments. So, we'll have to think about, that on a case-by-case basis until we have this final kind of disadvantaged communities framework developed. And I guess the last point to make here is the advancement of this interim, criteria for a disadvantaged community does not change the eligibility for programs necessarily. So, where there are, programs and initiatives that are focused on low-income weatherization or affordable housing, or a number of other types of initiatives, we would still expect that eligibility for those programs remain. It's just that this interim definition of a disadvantaged community provides a framework to orient programs and initiatives to think about how they're investments are benefiting communities. Next slide, please. So with respect to this interim definition, we've landed on a set of three primary components of the definition. Essentially, we're looking at communities that are meeting the threshold for the HUD 50% of area median income. Those block groups, actually we're taking the top quartile of those census block groups, as well as communities that are meeting the potential environmental justice criteria established by DEC. In this case, we're looking at census block groups that meet both of those thresholds. And in addition to that, we're layering on top of that communities that are located within New York State Opportunity Zones, which those of you who aren't familiar with Opportunity Zones were low-income census tracts that were identified by the state back in 2017 for the purpose of encouraging investment in underserved parts of the state as part of the federal Opportunity Zone program. Next slide, please. And so as we kind of think about kind of the coverage, both from a geographic perspective and with respect to just like the percentage of the population that's covered through this interim approach, we're covering somewhere around 28% of the population, and around 27% of the census block groups in the state would fall kind of within this criteria. You know, as you can see here from the data, you know, we have a heavy weight towards downstate, New York City, as we're thinking about kind of those parts of the state that have high concentrations of households and residents that you know, meet low income thresholds or maybe you know, belonging to kind of a minority population. We see a heavy concentration of those census block groups in the downstate area. And as we're thinking about kind of how this plays out across REDCs, the table on the right can provide you with an overview of, you know, how each REDC kind of shakes out with respect to kind of what the total state population is and the percentage of the population that is covered by the interim definition of a disadvantaged community. So this data is provided, you know, to kind of illustrate kind of the level of coverage that this current definition has. However, as the Climate Justice Working Group advances their work to land on the criteria for a disadvantaged community, they'll have to think about these issues, right? So what's the right kind of coverage for the state population? How do we think about the weighting of upstate, downstate? You know, we know that there are communities that are in need and meet kind of those various you know, criteria identified in the CLCPA all over the state. So the working group, you know, with public comment, will need to kind of really think about you know, how to address those thorny issues. Next slide, please. And so so one of the resources that NYSERDA has pulled together, because we do have a couple of initiatives that you know, we will be looking to encourage investment in these communities in the interim. You know, we've pulled together an interactive map that allows for applicants or communities to enter an address and get a yes/no as to whether it's included, you know, within this interim definition. So that's currently available on the NYSERDA website. In addition, we'll be adding some static maps as well as lists of the census block groups that are included. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that's it on the disadvantaged community. So I guess we could open up for questions here. I know we have a few minutes
Dennis?
remaining.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Chris. Chris, I was trying to get to this point early in the presentations earlier, and it's kind of like this issue of timing for me. You're defining disadvantaged communities criteria, and then as part of that, once we define the disadvantaged communities, is your group then defining what is meant by benefits that we're trying to derive within those communities? Because as we then define the benefits, it really provides much more focus for the individual advisory panels that we have, so it's not a silo issue to me. It's really more of a focus based on the defined definition of disadvantaged communities and the definition that you're deriving from those very communities as to what they feel is their benefit under the CLCP. Because doesn't this then, provide a much more efficient alignment for all of the parties to come together, because they have a focus that's defined by your team to define and develop much more holistic strategies to solve a bigger issue of challenges and opportunities within the framework of a disadvantaged community. That's where I was trying to get to earlier.
Yeah, Dennis. So there are certainly parallel work streams happening here, and I think there will be a need for us to keep this as a continuing conversation across the panels and with the council, obviously. But maybe just a little bit of insight here on some of the other work streams that are underway, and maybe we kind of can have this conversation at another council meeting if the co-chairs and the council members want to do that. But so there's a state staff team that is currently looking at the various investments that would kind of fall under that energy efficiency and clean energy kind of set of buckets. So kind of looking at kind of all of the various kind of investment areas identified in the law. And in parallel, there's a state team that's pulling some thoughts together now around what, a benefits framework, would look like. So part of what, we want to be able to do is for the various investments, understand the types of benefits that are attributable to those investments, right? And then kind of think about how you measure those benefits, right? And are we able to directly measure them, or there's some sort of analysis or evaluation that's going to be necessary, or survey modeling. And then there's a question of, how do we roll those benefits up and be able to enable ourselves to track them and report them? So those are kind of active work streams that I think kind of deserve more, more conversation as that work kind of unfolds. But I think, as long as the panels can identify what they believe are the priority areas for advancing equity and climate justice, I think flagging those and maybe there's some kind of interventions or discussions we could have, sooner than later, just to kind of help think about the benefits associated with those, those priority areas. I think that can be one way we continue to advance this work and not put the panels in a position where they're kind of unsure about what to do, right? And so I don't know if any other folks from the state team have a view on that, but.
Well, Keisha, did you have something?
Yeah, I have more of a comment. I know a tremendous amount of work went into identifying the interim definition, and even more work is going to go into coming up with the final. I just wanted to raise, there may be an opportunity to more fully incorporate the criteria behind the opportunity zones, knowing that there were some restrictions laid out at the federal level that made the state have to make some decisions, but there's some eligible communities that might be worth incorporating within the interim definition as well, especially as it plays out from state agency investments.
Yeah, Keisha, it'd be great to talk through that. And I guess just a quick comment on that. So in kind of assessing the census block groups covered by those 3 different sets of criteria, it wound up being that the opportunity zones were kind of additive. So there was a lot of overlap between the opportunity zones and census block groups that were covered in the HUD 50%, AMI, and potential EJ areas. But it's worth us kind of taking another look at that.
I say, I know that we're at time, so I wanted to just register. I think it would be fantastic if we could have a little more time to talk about this. I know I have a lot of things to ask and a lot of things I'd like to say. My first concern being that timing of these work streams. I'm glad I'm glad to hear there's a lot of work. I'm so glad to see this progress being made. And it's so important that this information, in particular the scale of what we're talking about here, is in the hands of that climate justice working group so they can fully understand the repercussions. But I thank you for this report out, and it would be just saying, I would think it would be great if we could have another bite at this apple.
Right, thank you. No reason we can't take this up on a regular basis as this unfolds over the coming months. Okay, I don't see any other questions on here. No, Peter.
So I just want to walk away clear. Is this a recommendation that has come from the Climate Justice Working Group that we adopt, as a state, this interim guidance? I'm just not 100% clear on that of like exactly, what we're looking at right here in terms of interim guidance if it's adopted.
Yeah, so this interim approach was identified and pulled together by the state teams and reviewed with the Climate Justice Working Group prior to us adopting it.
It doesn't sound like they've endorsed or advanced it or put a recommendation on it for the Climate Action Council. I don't know if it's needed, but I just want to understand sort of,
Yeah, Peter, I don't think there's anything for us to weigh in on here. The Climate Justice Working Group is comfortable with us using it until we have a more permanent definition that can be brought, obviously, in front of the council. So we welcome regular dialogue on it, online and offline. Certainly, the Climate Justice Working Group meetings are also open for viewing from the public. We'd encourage you to take part in those too.
Yeah, that's right. This is not something that we have to necessarily approve as a council, but rather this is guidance for the agencies, particularly to employ in implementing their programs and the like as we speak, given that the clock started ticking January 1 of this year. So, Chris, I know you moved quickly. I'm sure there will be other opportunities to engage on this. This is dynamic, but thank you for the update on behalf of the council. And seeing no additional hands raised, I am going to wrap up with a couple of updates. I'd like to share with all of you that we will soon be noticing a public workshop that will be of particular interest, I believe, to the members as well as those attending today's meeting. We know everyone is busy, especially this time of year, so I want to go ahead and share the date and time ahead of the formal issuance of a notice, so you can mark your calendars and hopefully join us. So this is going to be I will call it a decarbonization workshop. It is going to focus on several technologies from an innovation perspective that could play a role in decarbonizing those hard to decarbonize sectors of New York's economy. This workshop will be reviewing technologies such as long duration storage, HFC replacements, green hydrogen, and carbon capture. So if you have a pen, it will take place on December 8th at 2 p.m. Again, we'll be sending a notice soon, but just so you know, December 8th, 2 p.m. Workshop on decarbonization technologies. So each of you will receive a formal invitation soon. And again, we'd welcome your participation in that workshop. Otherwise, in just a few short weeks, we will plan to see you at the next meeting of the Climate Action Council, which is scheduled for December 15th. We do plan to hear about the work of the other advisory panels that were not captured today. And in addition, and noting our commitment from today's discussion, we will certainly plan to take up the topic of bioenergy in more depth, and certainly with the benefit of some time, I'm sure you'll come with additional thoughts and questions as well. So I'll pause and just ask Basil if there's anything he would like to add. If not, we will close the meeting with thanks.
Doreen, nothing to add other than to say thank you for your endurance, all of you. I see we have 188 people still that have stayed with us now for 3 hours. So great to spend time with you all, and happy Thanksgiving.
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.